Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Chapter 1. Living in the Multiverse, Getting Stronger by Taking Advice on the Rooftop of Chuunibyou High School. Listen carefully, Haru-kun. At this moment, a petite beautiful girl wearing an eye patch stood with her hands on her hips, speaking seriously to the boy in front of her. If you want to awaken the same wicked eye as mine, there's only one method: meditate on the true form of the wicked eye wielder for 3 days and 3 nights. The boy had handsome features but seemed somewhat naive, appearing shocked by the girl's words, his eyes filled with admiration and worship. Feeling the boy's worship, Rika Takanashi couldn't help but feel proud. However, a trace of undetectable panic flashed in her beautiful eyes. Although she was a Chuunibyou, Rika Takanashi actually knew deep down that things like the wicked eye didn't exist. What if the person in front of her couldn't learn the wicked eye? Would his worship of her disappear, and would he think she was a fraud? Rika Takanashi was extremely worried. After all, since coming to Chuunibyou High, she had hardly encountered any like-minded people. Now that she had finally met someone similar who deeply believed in the wicked eye and even asked her how to learn it, she definitely didn't want to lose such a good partner. Sigh, she could only hope that Haru would be as easy to fool as Takamori-sani. In her current situation, Rika Takanashi could only pray like this. Despite her inner worries, she maintained her facade of complete confidence in mastering the wicked eye. So you're saying that by meditating on Takanashi-san for 72 hours, I can awaken the wicked eye, right? Haru's eyes were full of light, seemingly truly believing Rika Takanashi's words. At this moment, those innocent and beautiful eyes carried a hint of longing and anticipation. Seeing that longing gaze, Rika Takanashi's pretty face couldn't help but blush slightly. After all, this Haru was extremely handsome, and combined with his complete trust and worship of her, it made Rika Takanashi feel a sense of guilt about deceiving someone who trusted her so much. No, the wicked eye truly exists, and the invisible boundary line exists too. At this moment, Rika Takanashi shook her head vigorously, abandoning the weak thoughts in her heart. If Haru truly had sincerity, he might not be unable to learn the wicked eye and see that mysterious world. Deceiving herself like this, Rika Takanashi quickly cast aside that bit of guilt. That's right, with my qualifications, I can do it, and with your qualifications, Haru-kun, you definitely can too. Rika Takanashi nodded seriously. Advice detected: meditate on Rika Takanashi for 72 hours. Reward: heterochromia. Hearing the voice in his mind, Haru's handsome face couldn't help but show a hint of joy. It really worked. The advice-taking system really can let me gain supernatural abilities. Haru was extremely excited. Without a doubt, Haru was a transmigrator. However, this transmigrator had only recovered his past life memories a month ago due to a car accident. Naturally, upon awakening his past life memories, he obtained a golden finger. The golden finger had awakened just yesterday, called the advice-taking system. By listening to others' advice and following their suggestions, he could obtain rewards. For example, if someone advised Haru to run 10 kilometers to exercise his body. If Haru followed the advice and ran 10 kilometers, his physical condition would be greatly enhanced. Of course, not everyone's advice was useful, only advice from specific people would work. Rika Takanashi was one such specific person. So today, Haru had found Rika Takanashi, pretending to also be a Chuunibyou, hoping to learn the wicked eye. Since he had a golden finger, Haru naturally didn't just want to enhance his physical condition. His real goal was to possess true supernatural abilities in this ordinary multiverse daily world, even becoming the only god in this world. Therefore, Haru's initial target was supernatural abilities. Originally, he was worried the system couldn't achieve this. Now it seemed he had underestimated the system. Rika Takanashi's advice had worked. Just meditating for 72 hours will do. Haru's heart was full of anticipation. Although he didn't know what effects the system's reward of heterochromia would have, he had a premonition that it would definitely be a supernatural ability reward. Just then, the class bell rang. Oh no! Rika Takanashi's small face panicked. She had been too excited and forgot about class. Let's hurry back to the classroom. Haru also remembered. The next class was Shizuka's. Missing the homeroom teacher's class would be like looking for trouble with a lantern in the toilet. Looking for shit. The two quickly ran back to the classroom. Haru ran while harboring anticipation for the supernatural. Unfortunately, he needed to meditate for 72 hours. Haru was already somewhat impatient to gain supernatural abilities. However, the immediate priority was dealing with being late. He had a feeling this was going to be bad. Haru sighed inwardly. He had just been discharged from the hospital yesterday, and this was his first time attending Shizuka's class. Getting late for Shizuka's class on the first day didn't bode well. Chapter 2, The Overly Shy Rika Takanashi. Sure enough, Haru's premonition came true. Takanashi, Haru, go stand in the hallway. As soon as they entered the classroom, the graceful black-haired beauty at the podium, Shizuka Hiratsuka, coldly addressed the two who were trying to sneak in through the back door. In the classroom, all the students looked at the two with strange gazes. Whispers arose. That Haru, who was hospitalized for a month, actually showed up late to Shizuka-sensei's first class. He's really got guts. He really does have guts, and he's hanging around with that Chuunibyou Rika Takanashi. Could he be a Chuunibyou too? What a shame. He's so handsome, but he's actually a Chuunibyou? Hearing the discussions around them, some female students who had originally been attracted to Haru's good looks and wanted to find opportunities to approach him immediately gave up. In Japanese schools, students' reputations among peers were extremely important. Students with poor reputations would basically be isolated. No one dared to be unconventional and associate with students who had poor reputations, as it would implicate themselves, lower their own reputation, and ultimately lead to being isolated together, or even bullied. That Haru was hospitalized for a month, and various cliques have already formed in the class. It's already difficult for him to integrate into any group. Now, with this incident further damaging his reputation, he'll probably be relegated to the fringes for all 3 years of high school. In one corner of the classroom, Hukaman Hikage observed the class dynamics and couldn't help but think to himself, feeling some sympathy for Haru. However, thinking that even if Haru became a class outcast, he was still a handsome guy. And he had just arrived at school and already became good friends with the beautiful girl Rika Takanashi. Even if he became an outcast, so what? Damn it, normies should all just die. Hukaman Hikage gritted his teeth, feeling that his sympathy for such a life winner like Haru was presumptuous. Although Rika Takanashi was a Chuunibyou, no matter how Chuunibyou she was still a cute beautiful girl. While the boys on the surface didn't dare approach Rika Takanashi, who knew how many secretly had feelings for her. On the other side of the classroom, a cute girl with a dango hairstyle and an excellent figure listened to the surrounding students' discussions with an extremely complex expression. Her eyes unconsciously glanced toward the figure outside the window, but she didn't dare let the classmates beside her notice. In the front row of the classroom, Morimori-Sani, who had been elected class president due to her high popularity, also showed sympathy on her pretty face. Just because he's with a Chuunibyou, he gets ostracized. How terrifying. That's exactly why my dark history must never be discovered. Morimori-Sani secretly resolved, but she couldn't help feeling sympathy for Haru, who was about to become a class outcast just for getting close to Rika Takanashi. Standing outside the classroom, Haru had no idea that he was about to become a class outcast. However, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. No matter what, his past life had been that of a corporate slave for 3 years, giving him rich adult experience. How could he possibly look favorably upon high school students playing house? Of course, if he knew about being envied by a certain dead fish-eyed person, he would probably be amused for a while. Since he was being punished to stand in the hallway, Haru simply closed his eyes and began imagining Rika Takanashi. To obtain the system reward, he needed to imagine Rika Takanashi in his mind for 72 hours. It looked like just 3 full days. But in reality, to imagine for a full 72 hours, by Haru's estimation, it would take at least a week to accomplish. After all, he couldn't possibly spend every moment eating and sleeping thinking about Rika Takanashi, and every day there would be various things requiring Haru's attention. Completing the suggestion in a week would already be quite good. If he wanted to gain supernatural abilities as soon as possible, he couldn't waste a single moment. Thinking this way, Haru immediately began imagining. However, after less than 10 minutes, Haru felt someone tugging at the corner of his clothes. What are you doing? It turned out to be Rika Takanashi, who had grown bored of standing and couldn't help but strike up a conversation with Haru. Haru opened his eyes and sighed, unconsciously answering, thinking about you. Unexpectedly, upon hearing these words, Rika Takanashi's fair and delicate cheeks instantly turned red. Her beautiful eyes filled with panic, her body trembling as she shyly turned her face away. Seeing Rika Takanashi react this way, Haru realized his words just now were somewhat misleading. He couldn't help but chuckle. Didn't you say that to obtain the wicked eye, I must meditate on you as the object? Oh. So that's what it was. A flash of surprise crossed Rika Takanoshi's beautiful eyes, then she suddenly understood, realizing she had misunderstood. However, thinking that Haru was meditating on her in his mind, which seemed no different from thinking about her. Rika Takanoshi's cheeks turned crimson again. Unaware of Rika Takanoshi's thoughts, Haru was feeling puzzled. Ding! Your bond value with Rika Takanoshi has increased by 10 points, current bond value, 60. Due to increased bond value, Rika Takanoshi's suggestion difficulty receives a discount. Imagination time of 72 hours reduced to 64.8 hours. Haru was stunned for a moment. System, what is this bond value? What's this new function? Chapter 3, Bond Value, Shizuka Hiratsuka's Care, Ding. Responding to host, bond value represents the bond between you and the advice giver. Increased bond value reduces suggestion difficulty. Additionally, higher bond values can upgrade the system, obtaining higher level suggestions. Instantly, Haru understood that bond value was a good thing. High bond values not only discounted task difficulty but also allowed him to gain higher system permissions. In any case, he should try to increase bond values as much as possible. He hadn't expected his unconscious remark to have such an effect. Originally needing to imagine for 72 hours, now reduced by 7.2 hours at once, equivalent to a 10% discount. This discount rate is quite substantial. Haru felt pleased, immediately thinking about whether he should find more ways to increase his bond value with Rika Takanoshi. However, seeing Rika Takanoshi now too shy to even talk to him properly, he knew that for the time being, there was no hope. Forget it, I should be more patient. Even with cheats, I shouldn't think about reaching the sky in one step. Haru shook his head, feeling he didn't need to be so hasty. After all, this was a peaceful multiverse daily world, and he was still a student with plenty of time. There was no need to rush at all. Let's continue imagining. As Haru continued his meditation. Soon, the class bell rang. Both Haru and Rika Takanoshi breathed a sigh of relief. What Haru didn't expect was that Rika Takanoshi, being too shy, immediately fled back to the classroom as soon as she heard the bell. Only then did Haru remember that Rika Takanoshi's personality was indeed very pure and innocent. It seemed his words just now had quite an impact on her. He'd have to be more careful next time. Sighing, Haru was about to return when Haru came to my office. Unexpectedly, Shizuka Hiratsuka's voice rang out. Haru's heart sank, immediately sensing trouble. In the office, Shizuka Hiratsuka lazily leaned back in her chair, displaying that alluring perfect figure before Haru. TSK. Haru clicked his tongue. This woman really had no awareness that he was her student. Too unguarded. Haru, I didn't expect you to have such methods. Just your second day at school and you've already gotten involved with Takanoshi. Shizuka Hiratsuka glanced at Haru, her tone carrying a hint of amazement. Rika Takanoshi was one of the most troublesome students in her class. Because of her Chuunibyou condition, Rika Takanoshi had always been friendless, practically isolated. This situation left Shizuka Hiratsuka at a loss for how to handle it. She hadn't expected Haru, on just his second day at school, to give her such a huge surprise by being late with Rika Takanoshi, and in her class no less. To be honest, if Haru and Rika Takanoshi just became friends, Shizuka Hiratsuka would be quite happy. After all, whether it was Haru or Rika Takanoshi, both had somewhat special circumstances and found it difficult to make friends in class. The two of them together meant at least they wouldn't have to worry about being too lonely. But skipping class was unacceptable. So Shizuka Hiratsuka felt she needed to have a talk with Haru. Using the word involved is a bit excessive, Shizuka-chan. Haru replied nonchalantly. He wasn't feeling distant from Shizuka Hiratsuka just because he'd been absent from school for a month. In fact, during the month he was hospitalized, Shizuka Hiratsuka had made time every week to visit him and tutor him so he wouldn't fall behind in his studies. Therefore, Haru and Shizuka Hiratsuka were already quite familiar with each other, even more so than most students in the class. So Haru wasn't very worried. Humphrey, Takanoshi may have personality issues, but she's always been disciplined about class attendance and has never been late. Shizuka Hiratsuka gave Haru an annoyed look. TSK, guilty until proven innocent. I didn't expect you to be that kind of teacher, Shizuka-chan. Haru said with mock sarcasm. You little. Seeing Haru completely disregard her as a teacher, Shizuka Hiratsuka's forehead developed a tick mark. However, thinking about Haru's situation, she sighed. Fine, just don't be late again next time. Shizuka Hiratsuka thought about the real reason she had called Haru and decided to let him off for now. Haru, speaking of which, you've been hospitalized for a month and have already fallen behind other students in your coursework, so you need to be serious about your studies, understand? I understand that. Haru nodded. Even with cheats, he had no intention of becoming a poor student. Knowledge was humanity's most precious treasure, and Haru didn't think that having supernatural powers meant he didn't need education. On the contrary, great power must be matched with appropriate wisdom and knowledge, otherwise, in the end, one would just be a fool with brute strength. Before awakening his memories, Haru's academic ability had been average, with entrance exam results ranking around the top 100 in his grade. Now, having been hospitalized for a month, his grades definitely couldn't reach the top 100 anymore. However, Haru wasn't panicked. He had the system, and catching up with his grades would be easy. Good that you understand. Seeing that Haru wasn't being as casual as before this time, Shizuka Hiratsuka felt relieved, then continued, recently, a teacher has organized a special tutoring class. Originally, she was only tutoring 2 students, but she has a good relationship with me. After hearing about your situation, she decided to add you as well. I hope you can seize this opportunity and improve your academic performance. Upon hearing about tutoring, Haru's first instinct was to refuse. He had the system and could easily improve his coursework by himself. But seeing Shizuka Hiratsuka's expectant gaze, Haru immediately swallowed his words. No matter what, this was an opportunity Shizuka Hiratsuka had fought for him. Although she spoke casually, as if her friend had readily agreed to her request. But having an adult soul, how could Haru not understand that when Shizuka Hiratsuka made such a request, it was equivalent to owing someone a favor? Favors always needed to be repaid. Yet Shizuka Hiratsuka hadn't mentioned this at all to him, just quietly giving. How could Haru refuse such kindness? Chapter 4, The We Never Learn Trio, discovering 3 advice candidates. Although he had some suspicions, when he actually saw the figures in the classroom, Haru was still somewhat surprised. At this moment, it was already after school club activity time. After accepting Shizuka Hiratsuka's arrangement, Haru arrived promptly at the classroom she had mentioned. Then he saw 2 female students who had already arrived in this classroom, along with that familiar teacher. Let's start with introductions. Standing at the podium was a stunningly beautiful woman with a nice cold aura. She had refined and delicate features, with waist-length cherry-colored hair. Possessing an alluring figure, under her purple pencil skirt were a pair of black stockings covering perfect legs that made one's breathing quicken. Mifagirasu, known as the strictest teacher at Sobu High, there were few students in the entire school who weren't afraid of this teacher. But only Haru knew that Mifagirasu wasn't as scary as everyone thought. The reason this teacher had such a frightening aura was mainly because her personality was somewhat socially anxious, making her not good at interacting with people. Additionally, it was because she was overworked and often exhausted. To avoid showing this, she kept a stern face, which, combined with her naturally cool personality, created a very intimidating presence. Thinking this to himself, Haru showed no reaction on the surface. I'm Fumino Furuashi, a first-year Class J student. Please take care of me. The speaker had an elegant and gentle temperament, with waist-length blue hair, fair skin, delicate features, and a slender figure with perfect appearance. The only regret was that she was flat-chested. Fumino Furuashi, praised as the sleeping beauty of the literary forest, Sobu High's top liberal arts genius, a perfect scorer in all subjects. After she finished speaking, she showed a friendly smile to Haru and the girl beside her. After all, they would be working together frequently from now on, and she wanted to get along well with these 2 classmates. However, seeing Haru, a hint of curiosity flashed in Fumino Furuashi's beautiful eyes. She knew the identity of the girl beside her, but she had never heard of this extremely handsome boy named Haru. This was somewhat strange. Logically speaking, such a handsome boy shouldn't be able to remain unknown. After taking a few more glances at Haru, Fumino Furuashi looked toward Mifagirasu with both anticipation and awe. The current first-year Fumino Furuashi hadn't experienced what would happen later, so at this moment, facing Mifagirasu who was about to teach her, she was still quite expectant. I'm Rizu Ogata from Class 1B. Please take care of me from now on. The other student had orange-red hair, blue pupils, and wore red oval-framed glasses. She was petite, but what was most eye-catching was her pair of remarkably large assets. Rizu Ogata, a science genius, praised as the Thumbelina of mechanical crafting. She was expressionless, giving people a rather cold impression, and she also briefly glanced over everyone. Unlike Fumino Furuashi, she didn't give Haru a second look because of his handsome appearance, nor did she show any awe toward Mifagirasu. Similarly, her eyes were filled with anticipation. My name is Haru, a student from Class 1F. Haru also smiled slightly, neither overly enthusiastic nor appearing cold, maintaining an appropriate distance with everyone. After coming to this multiverse daily world, especially after arriving at Sobu High, Haru had seen too many familiar 2D characters. Therefore, he didn't develop any special emotions just because he met the 3 main heroines from We Never Learn. Of course, He was interested in beautiful girls, but he had no intention of being a simp. If he could pursue a girl, he would go for it; if not, it didn't matter. However, just then, advice qualified individual discovered, Fumino Furuashi, advice qualified individual discovered, Rizu Ogata, advice qualified individual discovered, Mifagirasu. 3 notification sounds rang out. Haru immediately felt a surge of joy in his heart. He hadn't expected that all 3 people in this classroom met the system's standards. Originally, Haru hadn't paid much attention to this after-school tutoring, but now it seemed he needed to put in some effort. 3 people with advice qualifications. If he handled this well, he would definitely soar to great heights. Before we begin class, there's one thing I must clarify. After the 3 finished their introductions, Mifagirasu immediately got straight to the point with an expressionless face. Furuashi-san, Ogata-san, I do not approve of your naive ideas. Abandoning your talents for boring dreams is just wasting your time. Upon hearing this, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's expressions immediately soured. Haru naturally understood what was happening. A liberal arts genius who didn't want to study liberal arts, but instead wanted to study science. A science genius who wanted to study liberal arts. Such things naturally seemed absurd to teachers. Especially in the eyes of someone like Mifagirasu, who had the experience of abandoning her talents for her dreams. She was extremely opposed to this. Mifagirasu's merciless criticism made both geniuses feel very unhappy, but since this was their first encounter, neither expressed their dissatisfaction. However, Haru knew that if things continued this way, it wouldn't be long before Mifagirasu would have a falling out with these 2 students, and their relationship would turn sour. Perhaps I can improve my bond values with everyone by changing this situation. Haru pondered thoughtfully, but for now, he didn't speak up. After all, his system had only awakened for 1 day, and he hadn't even completed a single suggestion yet. He was still just an ordinary person with no ability to change anything. Chapter 5, Inducing Fumino Furuashi. Despite the unpleasant start when Mifagirasu's words made the 3 students uncomfortable, she still began tutoring earnestly. At first, naturally, she tested the 3 students' levels. For now, she only tested Japanese and mathematics. Each person received 2 test papers. Haru-kun, Hiratsuka-sensei has told me about your situation. When dealing with Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, Mifagirasu felt somewhat frustrated with them, so her tone wasn't very good. But toward Haru, Mifagirasu had no dissatisfaction and tried to make her tone appear gentler. Being hospitalized for a month has indeed had a significant impact on your studies. In the upcoming tutoring, you'll need to work even harder. I understand, Girasu-sensei. Haru replied with a smile. In Mifagirasu's eyes, compared to the other 2 geniuses who were sulking, Haru's attitude was remarkably well behaved. Her mood improved somewhat. Upon hearing that Haru had actually been hospitalized for a month, Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata finally understood why an additional student had joined. They looked at Haru with eyes carrying a hint of maternal concern. Let's begin the test. After Mifagirasu finished speaking, she announced plainly. Much later, the test was complete. All 3 students looked at their test papers shamefacedly, including Haru. Fumino Furuashi scored perfect on Japanese but got a big fat 0 on the mathematics test. Rizu Ogata was the opposite. Perfect in mathematics but 0 in Japanese. Haru naturally didn't get zeros, but both his Japanese and mathematics scores were only in the 60s. No choice, I can only barely pass thanks to my past life memories. Haru sighed. In his past life, he had been quite the academic achiever, but having graduated 3 years ago, he had long forgotten most of what he learned. Being able to score in the 60s was already pretty good. If he hadn't awakened his past life memories, he might not even have managed 60 points. But what surprised Haru was that Mifagirasu showed no dissatisfaction with him, and her beautiful eyes even showed a hint of approval. Despite being hospitalized for a month, you still managed to pass. Not bad. It seems you didn't give up studying even while hospitalized. Instantly, Haru felt 2 admiring gazes fall upon him. Undoubtedly, they came from Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata nearby. Being hospitalized for a month and still managing to pass seemed quite impressive to these 2 geniuses. Of course, Fumino Furuashi thought Haru's mathematics passing grade was impressive, while Rizu Ogata thought the opposite. After Mifagirasu finished praising Haru and looked at the other 2, she felt somewhat overwhelmed. These 2 geniuses undoubtedly possessed exceptional talent in their respective fields. However, their target fields showed terrifyingly low aptitude. They both scored zeros, performing worse than Haru, who had been hospitalized for a month and missed school. But since she had already spoken harshly at the beginning, Mifagirasu couldn't say much more. Since she had accepted the principal's assignment to tutor these 2 students, she would naturally take responsibility. I'll start by explaining the wrong answers. Without further ado, Multiverse immediately began tutoring the three on their mistakes. Haru pretended to listen while his attention was actually focused on the system. He knew that he didn't have particularly outstanding talent in academics, so since he planned to become an academic achiever, he'd have to rely on cheats. With 3 advice-qualified individuals, perhaps I can obtain literature-related suggestions from Fumino Furuhashi and science-related suggestions from Rizu Ogata. Haru pondered thoughtfully. His system couldn't collect just any advice. First, there were level restrictions. Suggestions that were too outrageous couldn't be collected. Second, collectible suggestions often came from the advice giver's areas of expertise. For example, Riko Takanashi's area of expertise was Chuunibyou, involving the supernatural, so Haru could obtain supernatural-related suggestions. If he asked Riko Takanashi for academic advice, the system wouldn't be able to produce any effect. Since Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata were both experts in academics, just in different fields, Haru would need to approach them from this angle. Having made up his mind, Haru planned to seek advice from both of them after Multiverse left. Next, Haru patiently listened to the lecture, and time flew by. After Multiverse finished her explanation, she immediately announced the end of class and left on her own. Only the 3 students remained in the classroom. Since the 3 weren't very familiar with each other, the atmosphere was somewhat awkward for a moment. Seeing this, Haru, as the male student, naturally took the initiative to speak. Furuhashi-san, your liberal arts scores are so excellent. Could you give Ogata-san and me some advice regarding liberal arts? Rizu Ogata immediately perked up her ears. Obviously, she also greatly admired Fumino Furuhashi's liberal arts achievements and hoped to get advice from her. Fumino Furuhashi's pretty face showed a hint of panic as she weakly said, liberal arts and such. Aren't they quite simple? I just write casually and get perfect scores. Such a humble bragging statement immediately made Rizu Ogata puff out her cheeks, as she had scored 0 in liberal arts. Having expected this, Haru wasn't surprised, but he didn't give up. As long as Fumino Furuhashi could give advice, even if the advice was somewhat absurd, the system could collect it and form a task. Haru's mind raced, and he immediately knew how to guide the conversation, saying, so Furuhashi-san is naturally gifted. But perhaps this talent was cultivated through Furuhashi-san's lifestyle habits. So, Furuhashi-san, do you have any special habits in your daily life that you could introduce? I see. Rizu Ogata looked amazed, actually finding Haru's words somewhat reasonable, and immediately looked at Fumino Furuhashi with shining eyes. Talent can be cultivated? Fumino Furuhashi was somewhat stunned. Isn't talent something you're born with? However, seeing both of them looking at her with sparkling eyes, she felt a bit guilty and thought it was better to say something to brush them off. I've had the habit of gazing at the starry sky at night and thinking since I was little. Perhaps it's because of this. Ding. Instantly, the sound Haru had been anticipating rang in his mind. Chapter 6, Photographic Memory and Superthinking, another test arrives. Suggestion: gaze at the starry sky for 1 hour every night for 5 consecutive days. Reward: photographic memory. Haru's eyes lit up. Photographic memory. This reward was absolutely amazing. His effort in inducing Fumino Furuhashi hadn't been wasted. Furuhashi-san, your suggestion is really good. I'll definitely study hard. He looked at Fumino Furuhashi with glowing eyes, appearing genuinely grateful. This left Fumino Furuhashi completely bewildered. Study? Study by gazing at the starry sky? This method wouldn't be of any use for studying liberal arts, would it? Rizu Ogata was also somewhat skeptical, thinking that gazing at the starry sky was too ridiculous and not scientific at all. What could one possibly learn through such a method? Fumino Furuhashi felt a bit guilty. Haru-kun, this method might not be useful. I think you shouldn't have too high expectations. It doesn't matter. There's no harm in trying. Haru didn't mind at all, then looked toward Rizu Ogata nearby. Ogata-san, do you have any special study methods for science? Since he had obtained a system task from Fumino Furuhashi, he might as well try to induce Rizu Ogata as well. This time it was Fumino Furuhashi's turn to perk up her ears, watching Rizu Ogata with considerable interest. After all, her goal was to get into a science university and become an astronomer. Does science even need to be studied? Don't you just know the answers when you see the problems? Rizu Ogata adjusted her glasses, also making quite a humble bragging statement. Fumino Furuhashi puffed out her cheeks, feeling extremely frustrated. She had been racking her brains to study science, yet Rizu Ogata made such a humble bragging comment. It was like standing and talking without back pain. For a moment, the positions of Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata were reversed. It seems Ogata-san is just like Furuhashi-san, both naturally gifted. Haru smiled slightly, not surprised at all. So Ogata-san, what habits have you had since childhood? I think we could start with your habits to help us develop scientific thinking. Developing scientific thinking through lifestyle habits? That's not very scientific. Rizu quite directly denied Haru's idea. She had a thoroughly scientific mindset, and when she heard something that didn't follow logic, she would unhesitatingly voice her opinion without considering others' feelings. Of course, Haru didn't mind this at all. He earnestly put his hands together and said, "It doesn't matter if you just tell us. Please, Ogata-san." "Fine, since you insist on knowing." Rizu sighed. "I've always helped with household chores at home since I was little. Other than that, I don't have any particular habits." Ding. Advice obtained. Suggestion: do household chores for 5 consecutive days. Reward: super thinking, can accelerate the host's thought processes and grant computational abilities comparable to a computer. Haru felt delighted. This reward was no worse than Fumi no Furuashi's reward. Today's harvest was indeed quite good. Ding. Your current suggestion list is full. You cannot obtain new suggestions until you complete any one suggestion. At this moment, the system sent another notification. Haru wasn't surprised by this. The suggestion list had limitations. With his current basic permissions, the suggestion list could hold at most 3 suggestions. Only after completing suggestions and freeing up space in the list could he collect new suggestions. Of course, once his system upgraded and his permissions increased, the suggestion list would also improve, allowing him to collect more suggestions at once. Anyway, I already have 3 suggestions. Before completing these suggestions, there's no need to collect new ones. Haru didn't mind. You have to eat one bite at a time, you can't become fat in one go. Haru-kun, I advise you not to have too high expectations. There's no relationship whatsoever between doing household chores and studying science well. Rizu also didn't want Haru to have unrealistic expectations about following her unscientific advice, so she bluntly threw cold water on his hopes. I think the same way. Haru-kun, looking at stars doesn't necessarily help you learn Japanese either. With Rizu taking the lead, Fumi no Furuashi quickly took the opportunity to advise Haru as well. Both of them didn't want Haru to harbor any unrealistic fantasies. If it were that simple to learn liberal arts and science, they would have done it long ago. Why would they need to participate in this tutoring group today? Please don't worry, both of you. I'm just trying it out. It doesn't matter if I fail. Faced with their advice, Haru responded cheerfully. After all, both were acting out of goodwill, so Haru naturally wouldn't get angry about it. Seeing Haru's response, Rizu didn't particularly care, but Fumi no Furuashi became even more worried. Sigh, I hope Haru-kun won't be too disappointed when the time comes, she thought to herself, wringing her hands. After school, Haru went straight home. His home was a 2-bedroom, 1 living room apartment on the 6th floor of an old-style residential complex. In Tokyo, where land was worth its weight in gold, this could barely be considered a luxury dwelling. This apartment was the inheritance left to Haru by his deceased parents, along with a modest sum of money. The inheritance would at most support Haru through high school. If he wanted to attend university, he'd have to earn the money himself. Before awakening his past life memories, Haru had originally planned to work part-time after high school to earn university tuition. However, now that he had a cheat system, he naturally had no intention of working anymore. Who would want to be a corporate slave when they had cheats? After returning home, Haru made dinner for himself, then began doing household chores. He completed Rizu suggestion once. Haru felt that his thinking seemed to become much clearer. Feeling his mental abilities strengthen, Haru smiled. System rewards weren't something you only received after completely finishing the suggestion. Rather, they were obtained progressively. For example, if Haru received a suggestion that said, exercise once a day for 10 consecutive days to gain 10 points of strength. Then, every day Haru exercised, he would gain 1 point of strength, until after completing the 10th day of exercise, he would have accumulated all 10 points of strength. With Rikata Kanashi's suggestion, after Haru completed 1 hour, he also gained a little benefit. His originally somewhat nearsighted vision became unprecedentedly clear. With real gains in hand, Haru naturally worked even harder to complete the suggestions. After finishing the household chores, he immediately began meditating on Rikata Kanashi. When night came and the stars appeared, he went to the window to gaze at the starry sky. As expected, Haru felt his liberal arts abilities gradually strengthening as well. Under these circumstances, time flew by for Haru. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed, and it was time for the tutoring group again. We have another test today. Haru-kun, Ogata-san, are you confident? Fumi no Furuashi looked nervously at Haru and Rizu. Rizu expression was calm, but her slightly trembling assets betrayed her nervous mood. She took a deep breath. I've been working hard reviewing Japanese these past few days. I should be able to get better results on this test. What about you, Haru-kun? Both of them looked at Haru. They expected Haru to be as nervous as they were. After all, if the test results were poor, they would have to face the stern Mufagirasu-sensei. Anyone would be nervous about that. However, to their surprise, Haru showed no signs of nervousness at all. Instead, his face carried an expression of calm confidence. Faced with their curious gazes, Haru smiled slightly. These past few days, I followed both of your suggestions, and I feel they were very helpful. I should be able to achieve good results this time. It's over. Haru-kun is so nervous that he's having mental problems. At this moment, Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata exchanged glances, both seeming to see each other's thoughts. Chapter 7, Explosive Grade Improvement. Shocked Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata. Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata naturally knew how unreliable the suggestions they had given that day were. There wasn't the slightest chance they could help anyone improve. They had thought that Haru was just paying lip service and wouldn't actually do such pointless things. They hadn't expected that Haru seemed to have really followed their unreliable suggestions. Now, he was even confidently saying their suggestions were useful. How could they possibly be useful? For a moment, both felt sympathy for Haru. In their view, Haru must be under too much academic pressure these past few days. So he was deceiving himself by saying their unreliable suggestions were useful. He had even convinced himself of it. But once Mufagirasu-sensei's test results came out, no matter how much Haru deceived himself, he would have to face his real grades. What would Haru's state of mind be then? Just thinking about it made Fumino Furuashi feel a bit worried. She hoped Haru wouldn't have a breakdown. Just as both were feeling somewhat concerned, Mufagirasu entered the classroom. As usual, she distributed the test papers, began the test. Although Fumino Furuashi was still worried about Haru's mental state, once the exam began, she withdrew her attention and focused entirely on the test paper. Swish, swish, swish. Soon, only the sound of writing filled the classroom. Mufagirasu sat at the podium, watching the three students taking the test. The Japanese test was effortless for Fumino Furuashi, causing her no trouble whatsoever. However, Rizu Ogata was much the same as in the previous test. For every problem she wrote, she would furrow her brow and think for a long time. Ogata-san's liberal arts aptitude is really too low. Her thinking is completely that of a science student. Mufagirasu frowned. Finally, she looked at Haru. To her surprise, Haru's test performance this time was much better than before. Although he couldn't match Fumino Furuashi's smooth progress, he didn't seem to encounter any major obstacles either. It looks like Haru-kun worked very hard these past 3 days. Mufagirasu became increasingly satisfied with Haru. This was a diligent student. And he was applying his efforts in the right direction. Unlike Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, who ignored their great talents and insisted on taking the wrong path. Thinking about Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata gave Mufagirasu a headache. After the Japanese test ended, the mathematics test began. This time, the situation reversed. It was Fumino Furuashi's turn to look troubled, chewing on her pen, while Rizu Ogata was completely at ease. And Haru's performance once again surprised Mufagirasu. It was still very smooth. Being in good form doesn't mean much. What matters is the final results. Although Mufagirasu was surprised, she didn't think much of it. As a teacher, she had seen too many students who performed well during exams but whose final results weren't impressive. This test's difficulty was about the same as the previous one. In Mufagirasu's view, no matter how good Haru's performance was, his grades couldn't improve by much. After all, he had been hospitalized for a month. Soon after, Mufagirasu distributed the test scores with an expressionless face. However, the results were almost the same as last time. Fumino Furuashi, Japanese 100 points, Mathematics 5 points. Rizu Ogata, Japanese 6 points, Mathematics 100 points. When Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata saw their test scores, they immediately hung their heads. They were so ashamed they didn't dare meet Mufagirasu's gaze. Seeing their performance, Mufagirasu's mood became somewhat foul. These two people's aptitude in different fields was really too low. She almost began to doubt her own teaching abilities. Fortunately, when Mufagirasu looked at Haru nearby, her expression became much more friendly. Haru-kun, your test scores have improved significantly this time. Upon hearing this, instantly, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata raised their heads in surprise. They both looked at Haru. They had been worried about Haru's mental state earlier, afraid that after the exam, Haru would have to face poor results. They hadn't expected Girasu-sensei to say that Haru had improved significantly. Was this real or fake? Then they saw Mufagirasu hand down Haru's test paper. Japanese, 80, Mathematics, 85. Instantly, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's beautiful eyes widened in disbelief. How is this possible? These kinds of scores. Both beautiful girls were completely stunned. This improvement wasn't just significant. It was terrifying. They clearly remembered that Haru's previous scores were only in the low 60s. In just 3 days, he had improved this much. It was absolutely ridiculous. In fact, Mufagirasu felt much the same as Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata. She was extremely shocked. Such massive improvement in just 3 days. It was simply incredible. If she hadn't known that Haru's entrance exam scores were only around 100th place, and that he had been hospitalized for a month, Mufagirasu would have even suspected that Haru had deliberately held back during the previous test. But regardless, Haru's current test scores had indeed improved dramatically. Compared to the other two, this greatly dispelled Mufagirasu's foul mood. Haru's improvement proved that her tutoring was effective, Mufagirasu thought to herself. Her recognition of Haru grew even stronger. Of course, she understood that no matter how good her tutoring was, 3 days couldn't make such a big difference. The main reason was still Haru's hard work these past few days. Such a diligent student. Mufagirasu became more and more satisfied the more she looked at him. He was completely unlike those two students who wasted their talents. However, the next moment, Mufagirasu was stunned. My improvement is so significant thanks to Girasu-sensei's guidance, as well as the suggestions from Furuhashi-san and Ogata-san. Faced with the 3 people's shocked gazes, Haru said cheerfully. Actually, Mufagirasu had guessed wrong. Haru hadn't spent much time studying these past few days. The progress in his 3-day task completion had given him significant improvements in memory and thinking ability. Therefore, just by briefly looking at books, his grades had reached this level. So Haru was speaking completely from the heart and telling the truth. However, when these words reached the ears of the 3 people, they became strange. Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata were completely bewildered. Haru actually said it was thanks to their suggestions? Only they knew best that their suggestions had absolutely nothing to do with Haru's grade improvement. So why was Haru saying this? They found it strange. Mufagirasu also looked at Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata in surprise. Her originally stern gaze suddenly became somewhat gentler, and she had a sudden realization. So these past few days, you two have also been helping Haru-kun with his studies? No wonder. Students do indeed need to help each other. Mufagirasu's opinion of the 2 good students improved somewhat. Although their personalities were naive, they were very kind to their classmates. Because of this, they should be guided onto the right path even more. Hearing Mufagirasu's words, both Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata were stunned. Chapter 8, Fumino and Rizu's Misunderstandings. The teacher's curiosity. Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata really wanted to say, "Teacher, you've misunderstood. We didn't do anything." However, faced with Mufagirasu's approving gaze, both felt too guilty to speak up. After all, over these 3 days of tutoring, Mufagirasu's attitude had become increasingly stern. Both of them had felt this. Now, she was finally showing friendliness. They also breathed a sigh of relief and felt too embarrassed to tell the truth. But both knew clearly that this was entirely thanks to Haru. If Haru hadn't said that, Mufagirasu definitely wouldn't be acting this way. I understand now. At this moment, a flash of realization appeared in Fumino Furuhashi's beautiful eyes. She had figured something out. The reason Haru-kun gave such a lame excuse, saying his grade improvement was due to our unreliable suggestions, was completely intentional. Fumino Furuhashi looked at Haru gratefully, feeling deeply moved. Haru-kun must have seen that the atmosphere between us and Girasu-sensei wasn't very good, so he deliberately said those things, hoping to ease the relationship between us and Girasu-sensei. I see. Haru-kun had been planning to do this all along, but he didn't tell us and just quietly carried out his plan alone. To do so much for us when we've only known each other for a few days. Haru-kun is really so sweet. Thinking this way, Fumino Furuhashi felt increasingly moved, and her cheeks couldn't help but flush slightly. Rizu Ogata initially couldn't understand. But at this moment, noticing Fumino Furuhashi's grateful gaze toward Haru, suddenly, she also had a realization. Then, feeling moved as well as a bit embarrassed. After all, that day, she had been quite blunt in crushing Haru's fantasies. Yet Haru didn't mind at all and even helped them ease their relationship with Girasu-sensei today. Ding! Your bond value with Fumino Furuhashi has increased by 10 points, currently at 60 points. Ding! Your bond value with Rizu Ogata has increased by 10 points, currently at 60 points. Fumino Furuhashi's suggestion difficulty has decreased. Rizu Ogata's suggestion difficulty has decreased. What's happening? 2 notification sounds suddenly rang out. This left Haru somewhat confused. What was going on? He hadn't done anything, so how did his bond values increase? At this moment, he felt 2 moved gazes coming from nearby. These 2. They couldn't have imagined something, could they? Haru's expression became strange. If he knew what they were thinking, he'd probably laugh like a pig. He had been speaking completely truthfully, without any intention of helping them. Yet these two had actually imagined him as some sweet male protagonist. It was simply unbelievable. What surprised Haru even more was, after the tutoring session ended and Mifagirasu had just left, "Haru-kun, thank you." Fumino Furuashi stopped Haru with slightly flushed cheeks, saying shyly, "I also thank you." Rizuogato was also a bit shy, unnaturally expressing her gratitude to Haru. "Thank me for what?" Haru said with a completely bewildered expression. Fumino Furuashi was stunned for a moment, then a knowing smile appeared on her pretty face. Haru-kun wouldn't even admit to doing good deeds. He's really too sweet. Fumino Furuashi raised her head, her beautiful eyes full of shyness and admiration as she glanced at Haru. "I understand. Haru-kun didn't do anything. Goodbye, Haru-kun." Then she lightly ran out of the classroom. "You're a good person. Next time I'll treat you to ramen." Rizuogato looked at Haru with slightly flushed cheeks, her beautiful eyes also full of admiration, nodding firmly. Although she had a scientific mindset, she also possessed the delicate emotions of a girl, so she had the same thoughts as Fumino Furuashi. Haru felt this was absurd. What the hell? How did he suddenly receive two good person cards? After thinking for a long time, he couldn't figure it out. Haru couldn't be bothered to think about it further. Anyway, the increase in bond values was real, meaning task difficulty would decrease. He could obtain rewards faster now. Thinking about the rewards he was about to receive, Haru couldn't help but remember Rika Takanashi's suggestion. In terms of difficulty, Rika Takanashi's was the highest. Therefore, Haru wanted to increase his bond with Rika Takanashi even more. The problem was that Rika was far too shy. That unconscious comment last time had made Rika Takanashi avoid him for the past 2 days. She would blush whenever she saw him. She didn't dare talk to him at all. "I can't stimulate her next time." Haru sighed. Such an innocent girl was truly rare. In the teacher's office, Shizuka Hiratsuka was looking at a club application form with a headache. At this moment, she saw Mifagirasu walk in, seeming to be in a good mood. This sparked some curiosity. Strange, this junior colleague Mifagirasu was always in a bad mood after tutoring sessions. How did she become so cheerful today? Could it be that the two problem children in the tutoring class had made progress? "Mifa-chan." Shizuka Hiratsuka immediately spoke up. "You're in such a good mood today. Did Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogato make progress in their grades?" She hadn't thought about Haru, since as his homeroom teacher, she knew his situation all too well. Around 100th place in entrance exams, hospitalized for a month. Barely passing would already be good enough. Only progress from Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogato was possible. After all, these two were real geniuses, the kind that amazed all Tokyo high schools. Even if they changed fields, they should easily achieve good grades. Being called Mifa-chan made Mifagirasu feel a bit embarrassed. But hearing this from Shizuka Hiratsuka, the senior she respected most, she couldn't say anything about it. "No, Hiratsuka-senpai. Furuashi-san and Ogata-san's test scores are still unsatisfactory." Mifagirasu sighed. Just thinking about those two gave her a headache. They're completely unsuited for changing fields. In my opinion, they're just wasting their talents. It's not Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata? Shizuka Hiratsuka was stunned. Could it be Haru? That was impossible. She knew that guy's situation better than anyone. It couldn't be because of Haru. It must be something else. Thinking this way, Shizuka Hiratsuka unconsciously said, "Could it be because your matchmaking was successful?" "Matchmaking was successful? What, matchmaking?" Instantly, two surprised voices rang out from another part of the office. Then, two attractive female teachers immediately rushed over. They stared at Mifagirasu with murderous intent in their eyes. Unforgivable. So young and already successful at matchmaking. So enviable. Yamanaka-senpai. Sengoku-senpai. Being stared at with such gazes by two seniors, Mifagirasu was startled, then sighed and said, "It's not because of matchmaking, Hiratsuka-sensei. It's because Haru's grades have improved significantly." Huh? Shizuka Hiratsuka was dumbfounded. It really was because of him? Nearby, Sawako Yamanaka and Shihiro Sengoku were also stunned. What was this situation? Chapter 9, The Shock Teachers. Reika, you've learned the Wicked Eye? Haru-kun's grades have improved greatly. After Mifagirasu explained how Haru had jumped from an average of 60 points to over 80 in just a few days, Shizuka Hiratsuka's beautiful eyes widened, and she accidentally dropped the cigarette she had just pulled out. That kid really achieved those kinds of scores? Just 3 days, with each subject improving by over 20 points. How was that possible? Real or fake? How could there be a student who improves so quickly? Sawako Yamanaka and Chihiro Sengoku were also extremely surprised, becoming somewhat curious about this student. They had all been teachers for quite a few years and had seen many students with rapid grade improvements. But 3 days? A student who improved this much in 3 days. Even geniuses would be rare. Perhaps his condition was poor during the first test, and his condition improved somewhat during the second test, so he showed his true level. At this moment, remembering Haru's test performance, Mifagirasa made a speculation. No matter what, such rapid improvement was too abnormal. Only this kind of reason made sense. If that's the reason, then it's understandable. Indeed, no matter how genius someone is, they couldn't improve that much in 3 days. Sawako Yamanaka and Chihiro Sengoku finally felt they understood a bit, nodding their heads. Poor condition the first time? Shizuka Hiratsuka looked at Mifagirasa thoughtfully. But she felt somewhat doubtful. She knew Haru's entrance exam scores, and adding a month of hospitalization, being able to pass was already normal performance for him. Now achieving scores in the 80s was obviously quite absurd. However, though she felt it was strange, she couldn't come up with a better explanation, so she could only think as Mifagirasa suggested. Perhaps that kid studied hard even during his hospitalization. Shizuka Hiratsuka sighed and didn't think about it further. No matter what, Haru's grade improvement was good news, and she felt happy about it. Compared to Haru, those problem children were what really made her worry. Looking at the 3 large characters service club on the club application form in her hands, Shizuka Hiratsuka felt somewhat helpless, not knowing whether she should agree to that problem child's request. Ding! Rika Takanashi's suggestion completed. You have received the reward, heterochromia. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. Haru had obtained both the photographic memory and super thinking talents. Until today, Rika Takanashi's suggestion was finally completed, and Haru's first supernatural ability, heterochromia, was finally obtained. The photographic memory and super thinking talents have given me, who originally had only average aptitude, abilities comparable to a genius. In the corner of the classroom, Haru was excited. But compared to these 2 talents, supernatural abilities are what I most anticipate. He couldn't help but look toward the window. With a thought, he instantly felt his vision become unprecedentedly clear. With one glance, everything within 100 meters was crystal clear. Even small text on club bulletin boards over 100 meters away could be seen at a glance. Such powerful vision, but the heterochromia's abilities don't stop there. Haru smiled, looking toward several female students walking by the roadside. His left pupil bloomed with purple light, while his right pupil blazed with golden light. Instantly, the clothes on those female students disappeared. Purple. Black. Damn, this one isn't wearing anything. That's way too bold. That's right. X-ray vision. The most powerful ability of heterochromia was X-ray vision, which could directly see through others' clothing. If used to the extreme, it could even see others' internal organs. Truly worthy of being a real supernatural ability. But after using it, Haru felt his eyes go dark, his spirit become fatigued, his whole body go weak, and his stamina seemed greatly depleted. He almost collapsed on his desk. Using supernatural abilities consumes my stamina and spiritual power. Haru took a deep breath, realizing that his supernatural abilities couldn't be used without restraint. There was still a cost. Both stamina and spiritual power would be consumed. Comparatively, Haru felt that stamina consumption was more troublesome than spiritual power consumption. Perhaps because I'm a transmigrator, my spiritual power is naturally strong, but my stamina is at the level of my peers. No, far below my peers. Haru knew himself well. Due to the car accident and month-long hospitalization, his body was relatively weak. So, if Haru wanted to increase the number of times he could use supernatural abilities, he needed to find a way to improve his stamina. Of course, improving stamina would still require cheats. Who should I ask? Haru frowned. There didn't seem to be any advice-qualified individuals in the stamina field. Wait, there is one. Haru's eyes lit up as he suddenly thought of someone. It was his dear homeroom teacher, Shizuka Hiratsuka. Shizuka Hiratsuka's fists were so hard. She obviously had training. Perhaps he could ask her for advice. Undoubtedly, Shizuka Hiratsuka was also an advice-qualified individual. His system had detected this on the day he awakened his cheat. Just as Haru was thinking about what topic to use to guide Shizuka Hiratsuka, suddenly, a paper ball was thrown onto his desk. Haru was stunned, picked up the paper ball, and looked up. He saw Rika Takanashi in the front row looking at him excitedly. This girl finally dares to talk to me. Haru found it amusing. He hadn't expected Rika Takanashi to be so innocent that she wouldn't dare talk to him for a whole week straight, only working up the courage to speak today. Haru shook his head and opened the paper ball to see what Rika Takanashi wanted to say. After class, come to the meeting location. Graveyard of withered leaves. Reika, graveyard of withered leaves. Haru's expression became strange. It couldn't be that place, could it? After class, Haru came to the wire fence in a corner of the campus. Under a tree that was constantly dropping leaves, Rika Takanashi held a leaf with a serious expression. If someone who didn't know the situation saw this, they might think Rika Takanashi was planning to confess to someone. As expected, Haru already knew what Rika Takanashi wanted to discuss with him. However, in front of Rika Takanashi, Haru still had to act like he was a Chuunibyou. Sensei, what did you want to discuss with me? Haru put on the appearance of a good student, looking at Rika Takanashi with completely respectful eyes. Being stared at by Haru, Rika Takanashi blushed and turned her gaze away in panic. Ahem, my student, about the Wicked Eye Awakening method I taught you last time. Have you learned it? Rika Takanashi randomly found a topic to divert her embarrassment. I have mastered the Wicked Eye, sensei. Haru immediately showed a worshipful gaze. As expected of the wielder of the Wicked Eye. Your guidance was truly useful. However, my aptitude isn't very good, so it took me a full week to awaken the Wicked Eye. Rika Takanashi was stunned. What? He learned it? How could her randomly made-up Wicked Eye Awakening method possibly teach someone the Wicked Eye? Then, Rika Takanashi had a realization. Right, Haru was also from this world, familiar with the way Chuunibyou people talked. Worthy of being her student. Thinking this way, Rika Takanashi became even more treasured of this companion. In Sobu High, this place full of good students, finding such a companion was truly precious. Chapter 10, Far Eastern Magic Society, First Meeting with Yukino Shita. Ahem, let's put the Wicked Eye matter aside for now. Time is limited, so I'll get straight to the point. Listen carefully. Rika Takanashi didn't dwell on the Wicked Eye topic, since she had serious business to discuss with Haru today. She stared at Haru seriously, saying with great solemnity, I want to establish our base in this school. So we're finally establishing a base? I understand, sensei. You mean establishing a base in the form of what humans call a club, right? Haru nodded, deliberately showing an excited expression. Worthy of being my student wielder of the Wicked Eye, you understood my intentions so quickly. Rika Takanashi's eyes lit up, becoming extremely happy. She hadn't expected Haru to understand her so well, immediately grasping that she wanted to establish a club. Worthy of being her student. Little did she know that Haru knew the plot. Anyone else would have no idea what Rika Takanashi meant. A club is fine anyway. The school requires joining a club, and I haven't joined one yet. Establishing a slacking off club with Rika isn't bad, and it could help improve my bond with Rika. This was what Haru thought. The main goal was improving bonds, definitely not because he wanted to slack off by agreeing to join Rika's club. Far Eastern Magic Society? In the teacher's office, Shizuka Hiratsuka looked at the club application form in her hands with a massive headache. She looked up and stared at the two people in front of her with exasperation. Takanashi, Haru, can you tell me what this club does? Hearing this, Rika Takanashi immediately became energetic, raising her fist, to search for the invisible boundary line. To fight against the Invisible Boundary Line Management Bureau, we must establish our base in the school. The Far Eastern Magic Society was born for this purpose. Crack crack crack. As she spoke, Rika Takanashi heard the sound of Shizuka Hiratsuka cracking her knuckles, which immediately scared her pale-faced. She quickly hid behind Haru, saying weakly, my student, I leave the Iron Woman to you to handle. This is a test I'm giving you. Haru looked at Rika Takanashi with exasperation, then faced Shizuka Hiratsuka. Shizuka-chan, as you can see, we want to establish a magic club. The club activities involve exploring magic. Shizuka Hiratsuka felt very tired. Originally, hearing about Haru's great improvement, she had been quite happy, thinking Haru was a well-behaved and sensible student. It turned out he was another problem child. However, thinking about the lonely Rika Takanashi finally finding a friend, she couldn't help but soften her heart. Thinking about another problem child's application, an idea struck her. A scheme formed in her mind. Just as her devious plan was forming, a figure happened to walk over. Hiratsuka-sensei, how is your consideration going? A pleasant but cold voice rang out. Both Haru and Rika Takanashi couldn't help but glance over. Instantly, both were stunned. That was a beautiful black-haired girl who seemed to exist only in imagination. Refined features, delicate facial structure, fair and transparent skin, perfectly sized pink lips, shoulder-length black hair, and an adorably beautiful face. Perfect appearance, though unfortunately her temperament was too cold, and she had a completely flat landscape. Yukino Shida. Haru recognized her immediately. Even though he had watched the anime countless times in his previous life, when seeing the real person, he couldn't help but be amazed. The real Yukino Shida seemed far more beautiful than in the anime. but also much colder. Yukino Shida, your application is giving me quite a headache. Seeing her, Shizuka Hiratsuka's beautiful eyes flickered. Clearly plotting something. One person wanting to apply for a club room doesn't really follow regulations. Hearing that this person was also applying for a club and also didn't meet regulations, Rika Takanoshi's eyes lit up, immediately feeling hopeful. If the homeroom teacher could approve other students' non-conforming club applications, wouldn't that mean she could also succeed? There's nothing irregular about it. Yukino Shita seemed to pay no attention to the other students nearby, explaining matter-of-factly, with my grades, I can apply for a club room exclusive to myself. However, Haru felt that when Yukino Shita entered, her gaze had paused on him for a moment. Because of that incident, Haru raised an eyebrow, realizing something, but didn't say anything. At this moment, hearing Yukino Shita's words, Rika Takanoshi's ears immediately drooped. Only then did she remember that people were different. Yukino Shita was among the top 3 academic achievers at Sobya High, a super academic genius. For academic geniuses, the school indeed allowed special privileges. Compared to Yukino Shita, she and Haru really weren't qualified. People should still be modest, Yukino Shita. Shizuka Hiratsuka sighed helplessly. Not giving the teacher any face at all. I'm simply stating facts. Yukino Shita, like Rizugata, didn't like beating around the bush and preferred speaking directly. However, her presence was much more intimidating than Rizugata's. Rika Takanoshi nearby couldn't help but feel somewhat afraid, unconsciously shrinking behind Haru. The school does indeed allow special privileges, but as a teacher, I still have an obligation to give students some life advice. Shizuka Hiratsuka already knew how to handle Yukino Shita. You couldn't reason with her because you might not win the argument. It happens that these 2 students also want to apply for a club, and it's the same type of nonsense club as yours, with insufficient members. I propose that you merge to form one club. How about it? Hearing Shizuka Hiratsuka's words, both Rika Takanoshi and Yukino Shita were stunned. Merge their clubs? Rika Takanoshi immediately felt reluctant. It wasn't that she opposed merging with others, but Yukino Shita's presence was too intimidating. She didn't dare stay with Yukino Shita. Objection. Objection. But Rika Takanoshi didn't dare speak up. Haru and Yukino Shita spoke in unison. The 2 looked at each other, both seeing displeasure in each other's eyes. You speak first. Haru shrugged. Yukino Shita glanced at Haru, then looked at Shizuka Hiratsuka without reservation. My club has proper club activities. These 2 students' club has absolutely no connection to my club activities. I don't believe our 2 clubs can be merged. She had already seen the Far Eastern Magic Society application form on Shizuka Hiratsuka's desk. She naturally had no interest in merging with such a meaningless club. Yukino Shita's blunt refusal immediately gave Shizuka Hiratsuka a headache, and she stared at Haru with annoyance, wanting to hear what excuse this guy would give. I also believe that forcibly merging clubs with different natures has no meaning. Haru smiled slightly, seeming not to notice Shizuka Hiratsuka's gaze. Just kidding. Merging with the service club? He wouldn't agree to that. Chapter 11, Shizuka-chan's bull strength, fighting for the club room as a transmigrator, who didn't know that the service club was a thankless organization. Haru had no interest in helping a bunch of self-important people. Helping friendly friends was one thing. But what kind of people did the service club help from beginning to end? Most of them were a bunch of popular cliques who looked down on the protagonist group. Haru had no interest in being a self-destructive hero, and moreover, he didn't have the time for it. Yukino Shita's original intentions were admirable, but sorry. Haru wasn't that noble. Hearing the firm tones of both people, how could Shizuka Hiratsuka not understand that her plan had failed? Her original intention was to have these problem children join the same club. Combined with Yukino Shita's club nature, it could help these people who had trouble getting along with those around them gradually integrate with their peers. However, if only one person objected, she could still use her teacher's authority to force it through. But with both being so resolute, no matter how good her intentions, it was futile. Temporarily abandoning her plans, Shizuka Hiratsuka looked at Haru with annoyance. Haru, Yukino Shita's club creation violates regulations, but she can barely use honor student privileges. But Yuen Takanoshi's club doesn't even have enough members. Shizuka-chan, don't be so unreasonable. It's just 2 club members short. I can gather them within a week. Haru wasn't worried about the member problem. If nothing unexpected happened, Rika Takanoshi would bring her little best friend Sani Dakamori. Once Sani Dakamori came, wouldn't Morishimur be far behind? 4 members. Easy peasy. You weren't so considerate when you refused me just now. Shizuka Hiratsuka clenched her fists, feeling this guy was becoming more and more disrespectful. However, Seeing the problem child Rika Takanashi hiding behind Haru, she ultimately softened her heart. After all, with Rika Takanashi's personality issues, having her join other clubs really wouldn't be good for her. Fine, I'll give you one chance. Remember, within 1 week, you must find the remaining 2 members. Shizuka Hiratsuka opened her drawer and rummaged around. Finally, she pulled out 2 keys. One key was labeled 3306. One key was labeled 3307. Instantly, both Haru's and Yukino Shita's eyes flashed. According to Sobuhai's classroom specifications, rooms ending in 6 were large classrooms, while those ending in 7 were small classrooms. Haru naturally wanted the large classroom. Similarly, Yukino Shita also wanted the large classroom. Anyone would prefer not to have that small classroom. Shizuka Hiratsuka naturally noticed both their thoughts, and a cunning gleam appeared in her beautiful eyes. You two didn't give this teacher any face just now. Now let's see you two fight and get nowhere. The classroom assignment will be decided by yourselves through discussion. Remember, no fighting. You must convince the other party to accept your reasoning. Shizuka Hiratsuka smiled smugly, throwing the difficult problem to both sides to decide themselves. Tell me the result tomorrow. Shizuka Hiratsuka stood up, grabbed her bag, and prepared to leave work. Seeing Shizuka Hiratsuka about to leave, Haru hadn't forgotten about seeking advice from her. He quickly called out, "Shizuka-chan, wait a moment." Shizuka Hiratsuka turned back. What? Is there something else? It's like this, Shizuka-chan. Haru smiled slightly. You know I've been hospitalized for a month, so my body is a bit weak. I wanted to ask you for some advice about exercise. Hearing this, Yukino Shita's face flashed with unnaturalness, but she quickly covered it up. Shizuka Hiratsuka also glanced at Yukino Shita nonchalantly, then said helplessly, if you want to exercise, go find a teacher. I'm delicate and soft. I don't have exercise habits. As a woman anxious to marry, Shizuka-chan's mind was full of thoughts about increasing her femininity, and exercising would undoubtedly reduce her feminine charm, so she naturally refused to admit it. Shizuka-chan, you're being modest. Who doesn't know you're built like a tank? Haru chuckled. If Shizuka-chan counted as delicate and soft, then there wouldn't be any delicate women in the world. Who are you calling built like a tank? Shizuka Hiratsuka glared at Haru through gritted teeth, her fists making crackling sounds. Yes, just like that. Who knew that? Seeing this scene, Haru's eyes lit up. Shizuka-chan, I want to train to your level. The degree where one punch can kill a bull. Do you have any suggestions? You're the one who can kill a bull with one punch. Shizuka Hiratsuka was almost furious. She wasn't a muscle-bound man. How did this guy view this beautiful woman? She realized that in Haru's eyes, she probably had no feminine charm at all. Very depressing. Shizuka-chan, just give me some advice. It won't cost you anything. Haru grinned, already anticipating in his heart. As long as Shizuka-chan gave him any suggestion, the system might recognize it as a task. Shizuka-chan, don't drop the ball at the crucial moment and waste all my careful guidance. Shizuka Hiratsuka snorted, you want to kill a bull with one punch? Fine, I'll tell you. Punch the school wall 50 times every day. When you can punch through the wall, you'll have reached that level. Ding, advice obtained. Suggestion, punch the school wall 50 times daily for 10 consecutive days. Reward, 1 bull's strength. Your bond value with Shizuka Hiratsuka is 70. Suggestion difficulty decreased. 50 punches daily reduced to 40 punches. Finally hearing the notification sound, Haru was overjoyed. 1 bull's strength. This was definitely power beyond human limits. Not bad. He really could get physical enhancement suggestions from Shizuka-chan. Haru's mood became excellent, so he didn't detain Shizuka Hiratsuka any longer. After Shizuka Hiratsuka left, only Haru, Rika Takanashi, and Yukino Shita remained in the classroom. Time to argue over the clubroom assignment. During Haru and Shizuka Hiratsuka's nonsensical conversation, Yukino Shita hadn't interrupted from beginning to end, politely waiting nearby. Now that Shizuka Hiratsuka was gone, Yukino Shita immediately spoke without reservation. Haru-kun, I believe my club needs the larger club room. My service club has very legitimate club activities, extending help to students in need, and frequently receives different students, so it needs a larger club room. Haru naturally didn't want to give up the club room. Hearing Yukino Shita's words, he was amused. What did she mean by her club activities being legitimate? Was she implying their club activities were legitimate? Haru decided to let this self-righteous woman taste what it meant to bring trouble upon herself. He sneered and said, Yukino Shita-san, are you sure you want to decide the club room assignment based on the importance of club activities? Are you certain your club activities are more important than our Far Eastern Magic Society's activities? Yukino Shita looked at the smile on Haru's face and felt something was off. But confident in her club, Yukino Shita still insisted, of course. She didn't believe Haru's meaningless Chuunibyou games could compare to the service club's activities. Magic. There was no such thing as magic in this world. These days, even children didn't believe in such childish tricks. Chapter 12, Not Giving Up Until Seeing the Yellow River. Defeating Yukino Shita. Haru chuckled, Yukino Shita-san, you just said your club's purpose is to extend help to students in need. Such club activities are indeed very legitimate. Yukino Shita remained silent, with an expression that said it's good you understand. However, but compared to our Far Eastern Magic Society's club activities, the service club's activities seem rather elementary. Haru's tone shifted, becoming more aggressive. Yukino Shita frowned, feeling Haru was being stubborn. Haru-kun, please don't lie with your eyes wide open and deceive yourself. Rika Takanashi's eyes lit up. Hearing Haru being so assertive, she was immediately delighted and gave Haru an encouraging look. However, under Yukino Shita's intimidating presence, she still didn't dare speak up. I'm not deceiving myself. Haru smiled faintly. Our club activities involve exploring magic. Once successful, our club could change the entire human world. Compared to your club activities helping a few high school students, aren't our club activities that could change the human world more important? Yukino Shita laughed angrily. Nonsense should at least have some basis. Originally, she had been saving face by not mentioning Chuunibyou, but now that Haru was being so unreasonable, she decided not to hold back either. Haru-kun, please distinguish between reality and fantasy. Magic and such things don't exist. Using such meaningless play activities to compare with my club activities is pure sophistry. Magic does exist. At this moment, Rika Takanashi, who had been hiding behind Haru, finally spoke up angrily upon hearing Yukino Shita's words. She wouldn't allow Yukino Shita to disparage her beliefs. However, as soon as she spoke, Yukino Shita's cold gaze turned toward her. Since you insist magic exists, please provide proof. Eek. Instantly, Rika Takanashi turned into a weakling again, shrinking back behind Haru. Ultimately, Rika Takanashi only dared show her true colors in front of familiar people like Haru. Yukino Shita turned back to Haru, the corners of her mouth turning up. Haru-kun, if you also insist magic exists, please prove it to me. As long as what you say is true, I'll immediately give you that club room. In Yukino Shita's view, this move was a killing blow. That large classroom already belonged to her for sure. Faced with the aggressive Yukino Shita, Rika Takanashi had already lost heart. She knew proving magic's existence was impossible. But a small classroom was fine. She was already satisfied. After all, getting the club application approved already made her very happy. Sigh. Just as Yukino Shita thought victory was assured, Haru sighed. Originally, I wanted to get along with you as an ordinary person. Since you insist on seeing it, I won't pretend anymore. You want to see magic, right? Watch carefully. This is my wicked eye. Haru raised his head to look at Yukino Shita with a serious expression. Yukino Shita found it amusing. She muttered to herself, wondering whether Haru was genuinely a Chuunibyou or if the car accident had damaged his brain. He was putting on quite a convincing act with that serious demeanor. Meanwhile, Rika Takanashi had been excited upon hearing Haru's earlier words, thinking he really knew magic. But when she heard Haru mention the wicked eye, her small face immediately fell, and she felt somewhat disheartened. She might not know about other things, but she knew the wicked eye all too well. It was a Chuunibyou setting she had carefully fabricated. How could Haru possibly have a real wicked eye? However, the next moment, both beautiful girls' pretty faces froze. They saw. Haru's pitch-black pupils suddenly burst forth with dazzling light. Left eye purple, right eye golden. Within the pupils, mysterious ripples seemed to flow. His already handsome face gained an incredibly mysterious aura under these magical pupils. In that instant, both Yukino Shita and Rika Takanashi felt as if their entire bodies had been seen through. Their hearts were filled with shock. Rika Takanashi immediately jumped out, excitedly grabbing Haru's hand. So cool. Where did you buy those contact lenses? No, so this is the wicked eye. After the initial shock, Rika Takanashi immediately assumed that Haru's pupils had changed color just like hers. Wearing colored contact lenses. However, Haru's were more advanced and could even glow. Therefore, Rika Takanashi also wanted such high-tech colored contacts and unconsciously voiced this thought. But as soon as she spoke, she realized they were currently competing for the club room. Her heart sank, knowing she had said the wrong thing. Sure enough. Yuki no Shita had been somewhat startled initially. But upon hearing Rika Takanashi's words, a playful smile appeared on her pretty face. Contact lenses? I must say, Haru-kun, you did startle me just now. But fake is fake. Please just admit defeat honestly. Contact lenses? Hee hee, how naive. Haru looked at Rika Takanashi with exasperation. This helpful idiot. Fortunately, his wicked eye was real. Otherwise, he really would have to let Yuki no Shita continue being smug. Seeing the triumphant expression on Yuki no Shita's face, Haru decided to make Yuki no Shita despair. He swept his gaze over Yuki no Shita and Rika Takanashi. Ahem. All that white. So stimulating. His mouth went dry. Haru almost lost control. He needed to divert his attention quickly. So he looked at Yuki no Shita smugly, wanting to see despair on this arrogant woman's face. Haru looked at Yuki no Shita, white on top, blue on bottom. Yuki no Shita was stunned, not understanding what Haru was saying. Rika Takanashi was also puzzled, thinking about how Rika Takanashi had almost ruined his plans earlier. Haru snorted coldly and pointed at Rika Takanashi. Rika has pink on top, white on bottom. Both beautiful girls were somewhat confused. Haru, what are you saying? Your words make no sense. Yuki no Shita frowned. Please don't waste time. Just admit defeat gracefully. What innocent girls. Haru sighed, not expecting these two to have no reaction at all. Any slightly more worldly girl would have understood immediately. Blue, kitty. So Haru looked at Yuki no Shita, cleared his throat, and delivered the final blow. By the way, it's Garfield. Yuki no Shita's face had shown some confusion initially. But upon hearing Kitty and Garfield, she finally understood everything. Her expression froze instantly. Chapter 13, The Shy Yukino and Rika. Yuki no Shita wants to tutor Harukaya. Yuki no Shita's expression froze. Then, her fair and delicate cheeks were instantly flushed with an alluring crimson. The confusion in her beautiful eyes transformed into shock, embarrassment, and anger. She let out a sweet cry, immediately covering her chest with both hands and crouching down. She glared at Haru with the look one gives to scum, extremely embarrassed and angry. Hentai, pervert, voyeur, shameless. I never thought you were this kind of person. Sharp-tongued insults came one after another. Seeing Yuki no Shita's reaction, Rika Takanashi was only puzzled for a moment, thinking briefly. Then her entire face turned red, her whole body becoming hot. Oh. She made an even more embarrassed whimpering sound. Originally standing beside Haru, she now frantically hid behind Yuki no Shita, keeping her flushed face down, completely unable to look at Haru anymore. At this moment, both finally understood what Haru had been saying. More than shock, their hearts were filled with embarrassment and panic at being unable to show their faces. Looking at the extremely shy pair, the light in Haru's eyes faded, returning to their original black pupils. He smiled slightly. Don't say such harsh things, Yuki no Shita-san. You were the one who asked me to demonstrate magic. Yet you're calling me harsh now. Is this magic? Even if it is magic, it's perverted magic. Yuki no Shita's cheeks were filled with alluring crimson. Suppressing her embarrassment, she glared at Haru like he was scum, speaking through gritted teeth. Despite her embarrassment, Yuki no Shita was also somewhat shocked. Could this guy really know magic? Otherwise, how did he know what she was wearing today? No. How could there be magic in this world? It must be some high-tech contact lenses that can see through things. Yuki no Shita glared at Haru through gritted teeth. Unbelievable. I never thought someone would buy such perverted items. I'm calling the police. Hey, contact lenses? Look carefully. Where am I wearing contact lenses? Hearing Yuki no Shita threaten to call the police, Haru was displeased. He opened his eyelids wide and moved closer to Yuki no Shita, letting this girl see clearly whether he was wearing contact lenses or not. Already embarrassed to the extreme from being seen through, Yuki no Shita was startled by Haru's sudden approach and couldn't help but say in embarrassment and anger, "Don't come closer." Haru stopped and snorted coldly, "Fine, I won't come closer. But look carefully. Where am I wearing contact lenses? Don't falsely accuse this magician." Yuki no Shita took a deep breath, suppressing her embarrassment and anger, and looked up at Haru's eyes. But when their gazes met, Yuki no Shita's heart couldn't help but skip a beat, making her even more embarrassed. She had to admit that Haru was quite charming, with a very handsome face that was quite attractive to girls. But now wasn't the time to think about such things. Yuki no Shita, remembering Haru's miraculous pupils from earlier, also wanted to figure out whether it was high technology or real magic. She was somewhat doubtful. X-ray vision that could also emit colored light. Did such technological items really exist? Even if it was America, technology couldn't possibly be that advanced. But compared to advanced technology, magic was even more absurd. Yuki no Shita carefully observed Haru's eyes. To her surprise, she discovered that Haru indeed wasn't wearing any contact lenses. Her eyesight was excellent, and at such close range, she couldn't be mistaken. How is this possible? Yuki no Shita was uncertain. Could there really be magic in this world? This is impossible. He. Seeing Yuki no Shita still struggling desperately, Haru returned her own words. Yuki no Shita, I've already demonstrated real magic to you. Now, if you want to deny that what I showed wasn't magic, please provide evidence. Yuki no Shita was secretly annoyed. For the moment, she really couldn't figure out the principle behind Haru's pupils. Providing evidence was something she couldn't do. Moreover, when she had asked Haru for evidence earlier, Haru had delivered. Now that Haru was asking her for evidence to prove magic didn't exist, and she couldn't provide it, how could she have any face left to compete with Haru for the club room? She was completely unreasonable. I'll consider it my loss for now. Yuki no Shita was very unwilling to give up the large classroom to Haru like this, but she wasn't the type to refuse to acknowledge defeat. Since she couldn't provide evidence, she could only admit defeat. Thank you for yielding. Haru smiled slightly, unhesitatingly picking up the key to the large classroom and tossing it to Rika Takanashi. Sensei, I'm entrusting the key to you. Rika Takanashi was delighted and immediately took the key. The moment she received it, her gaze met Haru's. Instantly, she couldn't help but remember Haru's earlier expression. Previously, she had only found it mysterious, but now she felt as if Haru's gaze was penetrating her clothes. In an instant, her entire face turned red, with what seemed like steam rising from her head. Extremely embarrassed, Rika Takanashi didn't dare stay in front of Haru any longer. Clutching the key, she turned and fled. Hentai, voyeur demon. Thinking Haru had used that X-ray ability again, Yuki no Shita's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She immediately showed a vigilant expression, hugging her chest and stepping back several paces. Hey, don't falsely accuse me. Haru said with exasperation. When I use my ability, my pupils change to heterochromia. Who knows if what you're saying is true or false? Yuki no Shita snorted coldly, not believing him much. After all, only Haru could prove such a thing. Just thinking that staying in front of Haru was almost like being completely naked. Yuki no Shita's heart panicked, and her cheeks couldn't help but turn even redder. She picked up the key, turned, and hurriedly left. TSK. Seeing both beautiful girls' wolf prevention behavior, Haru was secretly annoyed. It seemed the heterochromia ability couldn't be used carelessly. For women, the lethality was indeed a bit too much. This time, Takanashi was overstimulated. Won't she avoid me for many days again? Haru thought his strategy had backfired. Last time, just saying something that resembled flirting had made Rika Takanashi too shy to talk to him for a week. Now he had actually seen her through completely. This time, he probably wouldn't see Rika Takanashi for at least a month. Whatever, the tutoring group needs to check results. Let me go there first. Haru shook his head, too lazy to think about this matter. Yesterday, the tutoring group had another test, but because the test ended too late, the scores weren't immediately available. Soma Fukirasu had the 3 tutoring group members come get their results after school tonight. Haru also left the office, heading toward the tutoring group's direction. After walking just a few steps, he noticed Yuki no Shita walking ahead. What a case of enemies meeting on a narrow road. Yuki no Shita seemed to notice the gaze from behind. She turned around, her beautiful eyes immediately filled with vigilance and embarrassed anger. Her steps also stopped as she said through gritted teeth, "You stalking voyeur, are you really unable to resist committing crimes at school?" Hey, don't say such harsh things. Haru replied with exasperation. I'm just going to participate in the study tutoring group. Who would stalk you? Study tutoring group? Yuki no Shita fell silent. The chaotic thoughts in her mind immediately dissipated. Only then did she suddenly remember that this guy had been hospitalized for a month due to a car accident. His academic performance probably couldn't keep up with his peers. So he was participating in a study tutoring group. Speaking of which, she was partly responsible for Haru becoming like this. She felt secretly guilty, and her vigilance and embarrassed anger toward Haru largely dissipated. Her beautiful eyes looked deeply at Haru. An idea formed in her mind. Perhaps she could help this guy with tutoring as compensation for that incident. With her abilities, bringing him back to the top 100 in his grade wouldn't be a problem. Chapter 14, Fumino and Rizu request tutoring, stunning Yuki no Shita. I'll do it this way. Yuki no Shita made up her mind to tutor Haru as compensation for causing his hospitalization. That's right. The culprit behind Haru's car accident was none other than Yukino Shita. Actually, calling her the culprit wasn't quite accurate. After all, it was when Haru hadn't awakened his past life memories and ran into the road to save a dog that he got hit by the car. Theoretically, Yukino Shita didn't actually owe Haru anything. But that was just theory. Yukino Shita still felt somewhat guilty inside, feeling she owed Haru and wanted to compensate him. Tutoring Haru, who had poor grades, and improving his performance so he could catch up with his peers. Yukino Shita thought this method could work. Just as she was thinking about how to bring up this topic, she suddenly saw a familiar petite figure approaching. With just one glance, Yukino Shita recognized her. The Thumbelina of science, Rizu Ogata, the ultimate academic genius with absolute dominance in science subjects. But what puzzled Yukino Shita was that this famous science genius was currently staring intently at Haru with a worshipful expression, walking straight toward him. What was going on? Yukino Shita was confused. The next moment, her expression froze. Haru-kun, please teach me. After standing in front of Haru, Rizu Ogata's pretty face was slightly flushed, her beautiful eyes looking at Haru with sparkles. Looking somewhat embarrassed but mustering her courage, she bowed to Haru with complete sincerity. This scene left Yukino Shita stunned. What the hell? She had just been thinking about helping Haru with tutoring. But suddenly, Rizu Ogata, this science genius, wanted Haru to teach her? Had she heard wrong? Yukino Shita clearly remembered that Haru's grades were just average, and having been hospitalized for a month, his academic performance had already fallen far behind. What ability did he have to teach Rizu Ogata? Moreover, Rizu Ogata herself was already a super genius. However, Yukino Shita was smart after all. She immediately thought that although Rizu Ogata's science grades were unbeatable, her liberal arts grades were just average. So asking Haru to teach her should mean wanting Haru to teach liberal arts. But she was still puzzled. With Rizu Ogata's popularity, even if she went to those liberal arts geniuses, some would be willing to teach her. Why look for Haru? Haru's grades were clearly just so-so. Just as she felt confused, another figure hurried over. That blue hair flowing in the wind immediately made Yukino Shita think of her classmate, Fumino Furuashi. Like Rizu Ogata, she was also an ultimate genius, but Fumino Furuashi was a liberal arts genius. Ogata-san, that's so unfair. Why didn't you wait for me? The girl who came running was indeed Fumino Furuashi. Currently holding a stack of test papers, looking out of breath. She stopped in front of Haru, supporting herself on her knees, gasping for a long time before catching her breath. Then, something even more surprising to Yukino Shita happened. Fumino Furuashi, just like Rizu Ogata before, had eyes full of pleading as she stared seriously at Haru. Please, Haru-kun, please teach me mathematics. As long as you agree to teach me, I'll do anything. So unfair, saying it to that extent. Hearing Fumino Furuashi say this, Rizu Ogata realized that just asking Haru for help without offering payment wasn't quite right. She immediately raised her hand. I'm willing to do anything too. Upon hearing this, Yukino Shita's expression completely froze. Her heart was filled with disbelief. Rizu Ogata and Fumino Furuashi, one a science genius, one a liberal arts genius, were simultaneously asking Haru to teach them. If Rizu Ogata was looking for Haru to learn liberal arts, then the liberal arts genius Fumino Furuashi looking for Haru could only mean one thing. She wanted to learn science. The same question arose. Haru's grades were clearly just average. Why would these two seek him out? For a moment, Yukino Shita found it completely incomprehensible. If not for her personality, she probably would have asked directly. Ogata-san, Furuashi-san, what are you doing? Seeing them like this, Haru couldn't help but find it amusing. These days, his test scores had been getting better and better. This had long made the two envious, but it hadn't reached the point where they'd want to become his disciples, right? Unless... Haru suddenly thought of something. Because Haru-kun is just too amazing. Fumino Furuashi's beautiful eyes were full of worship and amazement as she pulled out 2 test papers. These are the papers Girasu-sensei just handed out. Haru-kun, guess how many points you scored this time? Rizu Ogata also stared at Haru with shining eyes. It's incredible. I've never seen anyone more amazing than Haru-kun. How many points? Haru was surprised. Could his guess be right? Had he really done extremely well this time? Yukino Shita, who had been eavesdropping nearby, couldn't help but look over curiously. She was also puzzled about what score Haru had achieved to make these two geniuses want him to teach them. At this moment, Fumino Furuashi spread out both of Haru's test papers. Chapter 15, Double Bond Value Increase. Gaining skills from Yukino Japanese, 96, Mathematics, 100. Seeing these two numbers, Yukino Shita was instantly stunned. Could such scores really be achieved by Haru, who had been hospitalized for a month? How was this possible? Besides being shocked, Yukino Shita felt her face burning. To think she had wanted to tutor Haru earlier. With Haru's grades like this, what qualifications did she have to tutor him? Fortunately, she hadn't voiced this thought, or it would have been utterly humiliating. Feeling ashamed, Yukino Shita found Haru even more mysterious. What was going on with this guy? Not only did he possess that magical X-ray vision, but his academic performance had suddenly become so excellent. For a moment, Yukino Shita felt that Haru was surrounded by mysteries. She really wanted to figure out why this guy had suddenly become so amazing. As expected. Seeing his grades, Haru wasn't surprised. After all, he had already obtained the photographic memory and super thinking talents. With a little time spent, he had mastered Japanese and mathematics quite perfectly. The reason Japanese wasn't a perfect score was definitely due to the essay portion. His two talents hadn't improved his literary abilities, so not getting a perfect score on the essay was normal. It's truly incredible, Haru-kun. From 60 points to perfect score in just 1 week. Such progress is simply unbelievable. Yes. Japanese improved so dramatically all at once. Haru-kun, you must have mastered special study techniques. Please teach me. I'm willing to pay any amount for tuition. Both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata looked at Haru with admiration. After all, they had witnessed Haru's explosive grade improvement firsthand. Such progress was exactly what they dreamed of achieving. Therefore, both were convinced that Haru possessed special study techniques. As long as Haru was willing to teach them, their dreams could definitely be realized. At this moment, Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata looked at Haru like little fangirls, filled with worship and fervor. They would probably even consider dating him if Haru took advantage of the situation to suggest it. Of course, Haru wasn't so unscrupulous as to take advantage of people in distress. Furuashi-san, Ogata-san, isn't mutual help between classmates natural? Tuition and payment are completely unnecessary. I'll wholeheartedly help both of you. Haru chuckled and directly agreed to help them. Of course, he admitted this statement was somewhat hypocritical. Mutual help between classmates and such. He wasn't Yukino Shita, so he wasn't that noble. The reason he agreed to help these two was, on one hand, naturally because Haru's academic talents came from these two people's suggestions. Since they had helped him, returning the favor was naturally no problem. On the other hand, the main reason was still bond values. Tutoring them would definitely make it easier to increase bond values. Sure enough, after Haru expressed his agreement to help, bond value with Fumino Furuashi increased by 10 points, current bond value, 70. Bond value with Rizu Ogata increased by 10 points, current bond value, 70. Hearing Haru's words, Fumino Furuashi's cheeks showed an excited flush, her beautiful eyes full of emotion. Haru-kun, thank you so much. You're really such a wonderful person. Rizu Ogata also had tears welling up in her eyes, looking at Haru gratefully. She bowed perfectly to Haru, then said with determination, Haru-kun, from today on, I'll take care of your lunch bento. A flash of regret immediately crossed Fumino Furuashi's beautiful eyes. Oh no, if Rizu Ogata was bringing Haru bento, what could she offer him in return? Like Rizu Ogata, Fumino Furuashi naturally wouldn't let Haru help them for free. After all, they were classmates, so using money would be inappropriate. So lunch bento was actually the most suitable option. However, now that this suggestion had been taken by Rizu Ogata, Fumino Furuashi immediately had a headache. She couldn't also prepare bento, could she? Whatever, I'll think of something tonight. Fumino Furuashi thought to herself. No matter what, she absolutely wouldn't let Haru help for free. Having witnessed the entire process of two beautiful girls apprenticing themselves to Haru, Yukino Shita was completely speechless. Is it me who's gone crazy, or has the world gone crazy? Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata actually asked Haru to tutor them, and Haru agreed. Yukino Shita felt somewhat bewildered. She felt that in all her years, she had never encountered something so outrageous. Just as her mind was somewhat blank. Yukino Shita-san. Haru smiled slightly and suddenly called out to Yukino Shita. Yukino Shita instinctively looked at Haru. What did this guy want with her? Speaking of which, I've never helped other classmates study before. You should have more ideas about helping classmates. Could you give me some suggestions? Haru smiled slightly, looking at the cool beauty in front of him with anticipation in his eyes. Just kidding. With Fumino Furuashi's science aptitude and Rizu Ogata's liberal arts aptitude, Haru had no confidence in teaching them. After all, even Mufagirasu couldn't do it. In the original story, countless teachers had failed to achieve this. Haru didn't think he had such abilities, so cheating was very necessary. Asking Yukino Shita for suggestions was something Haru had just thought of in a flash of inspiration. On one hand, Yukino Shita was among those special individuals who could provide suggestions. On the other hand, Haru considered Yukino Shita's helpful personality. Tutoring others in studying could also be considered helping people, so obtaining suggestions from Yukino Shita that the system would recognize was completely possible. Of course, Haru hadn't pinned all his hopes on Yukino Shita. If she didn't work out, Haru would approach Shizuka Hiratsuka or Mifagirasu. These two were teachers, and guiding students was their profession. Haru didn't believe he couldn't obtain tutoring ability rewards from them. Hearing Haru's words, Yukino Shita misunderstood, thinking this guy was definitely showing off to her. Her heart immediately became somewhat annoyed. After all, due to the club dispute, she and Haru had some conflict. Haru taking this opportunity to show off was very normal. This smug guy. Yukino Shita snorted coldly. Thinking about a heterochromia incident, her face heated up. Suddenly thinking that this guy with those perverted eyes would have opportunities to be alone with two beautiful girls, he would definitely take advantage of the situation to see them both. Immediately, she looked at Haru with the gaze one gives to a criminal, saying disdainfully, "I think you tutoring Furuashi-san and Ogata-san with your eyes closed would be more effective." The sarcastic intent in Yukino Shita's tone was more than obvious. However, Haru showed no signs of anger. Instead, his face lit up with a delighted smile. Because he heard a ding. Chapter 16, System Upgrade Conditions Met, The Startled Megami Kato, Suggestion, Tutor others with eyes closed, 2 hours daily for 5 consecutive days. Reward, Perfect tutoring, you will become the most excellent tutoring teacher. You will always be able to adopt the most perfect teaching plan according to students' situations, making students progress rapidly. TSK, with this ability, if I opened a tutoring center, I could easily surpass New Oriental. Seeing this rewards ability, Haru was very satisfied. This ability was simply too suitable for him. Not to mention that this skill could make money, more importantly, this skill could help Haru quickly increase bond values. Haru had already discovered that individuals who met the system's criteria were basically characters with important roles in anime. In web novel terms, they were children of destiny. Most of these people were students. Or teachers. For students, nothing was more important than grades. With this skill, wanting to increase bond values with advice-qualified individuals would be much faster. Although this skill couldn't bring great benefits to Haru's personal abilities, it could help him increase bond values faster. It was a case of sharpening the axe, not delaying the woodcutter. Just then, another notification sound rang out. 5 suggestions have been collected, system upgrade conditions met. When the host completes all collected suggestions, the host's permissions will upgrade from level 1 to level 2. The system is going to upgrade. Haru's eyes lit up. Permission upgrades meant the system rewards would become richer and more powerful. This was great news. However, I need to complete all already collected suggestions to upgrade. Haru took a deep breath, immediately understanding that his next goal was to fully complete Shizuka Hiratsuka's and Yukino Shita's suggestions. Before that, there was no need to collect other suggestions. Thinking this way, Haru couldn't wait to start tutoring Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata. However, it was already after school, so there was no chance for tutoring today. Furuashi-san, Ogata-san, see you tomorrow. Since Fumino Furuashi had brought the test papers, Haru didn't need to go to the tutoring classroom. Mifagirasu wasn't holding supplementary classes today. Tomorrow afternoon was the tutoring time. After saying goodbye to the two, Haru didn't plan to leave school directly. After all, he still had one suggestion incomplete. Shizuka Hiratsuka's suggestion required punching the school wall 40 times daily. This suggestion's task not only specified walls but specifically required school walls. Punching outside walls wouldn't work. So Haru planned to find an empty place in school to complete today's task first. Soon, Haru found the place. None other than his own classroom. The classroom was empty, perfect for practicing punches alone. Bang. Bang, bang. The sound of hitting the wall continued. So painful. Haru's fist hit the wall, making him gasp from the pain. Only when he actually started this task did Haru realize its difficulty wasn't low. Punching the wall with little force wouldn't be counted by the system. He had to punch with great force for it to work. As a result, the wall's rebound force made Haru feel excruciating pain. He felt that at this rate, his knuckles would break open before long. One bull's strength really isn't easy to obtain. Haru sighed, only now realizing that system suggestions weren't always low difficulty. This made him suspect that the better the reward, the higher the difficulty. If he wanted to continue growing using the system in the future, he would definitely have hardships to endure. Despite the pain of hitting walls, Haru gritted his teeth and persevered. After all, This was one bull's strength, enough to change his constitution and allow him to use more abilities in the future. Not to mention, upgrading the system also required completing this suggestion. So he had to obtain this reward no matter what. But just as Haru continued hitting the wall. "Ano." Suddenly, a weak female voice came from nearby. Haru was startled. There was still someone in the classroom. He couldn't help but look in the direction the voice came from. The next moment, his expression froze. He saw a very cute short-haired girl. She had proper facial features, fair and delicate skin, average height, and a graceful figure with curves in all the right places. She was truly a beautiful girl with extremely high looks. But what was surprising was that such a beautiful girl had been staying in the corner of the classroom all along. Only when she spoke did Haru discover her presence. This was somewhat frightening. However, when Haru saw her face clearly, his surprise dissipated considerably, and his expression became strange. "Haru-kun, are you in a bad mood?" The short-haired girl looked at Haru weakly. "You've misunderstood, Kato-san. I'm in a very good mood." Haru showed a polite smile on his face. "Haru-kun." Megumi Kato's face showed no emotional fluctuation, yet gave people the feeling she was worried. "Venting emotions by hitting walls will harm your body." "I'm not venting emotions." Haru looked at the girl in front of him with amusement. That's right, this girl's identity was none other than Megumi Kato, known as Saint Megumi. Megumi Kato was also Haru's classmate. And she was also one of those special individuals with advice qualifications. However, Haru had only been back at school for just over a week, focusing all his attention on completing tasks. Combined with Megumi Kato's naturally weak presence that made her hard to notice, Haru naturally hadn't had any interactions with her. Precisely because it was Megumi Kato, Haru wasn't surprised that he hadn't noticed her presence. As if, "I have heterochromia, and my vision can be said to exceed human limits, yet I still didn't notice Megumi Kato." Haru felt this was absurd. His supernatural eyes couldn't even detect Megumi Kato. Just how weak was her presence? This was practically a supernatural level talent. Megumi Kato said gently, "If you're in a bad mood, you can vent in other ways, you know, Haru-kun." Obviously, Megumi Kato didn't believe Haru's words. After all, constantly hitting walls when alone was exactly the kind of behavior someone venting emotions would have. Although she wasn't familiar with Haru, Megumi Kato felt that as a classmate, she should still show some concern. It seemed he was really misunderstood. Haru was helpless, but then his heart stirred. Megumi Kato was also a special individual. Sooner or later, he'd need to improve his bond value with her too. Why not take this opportunity to build a good relationship with Megumi Kato? "Kato-san, I'm really not venting emotions." Haru's eyes moved, then he said seriously, "This is the training method Hiratsuka-sensei taught me. If you don't believe it, you can ask her." Chapter 17, The Gentle and Considerate Megumi Kato and Yukino Shita Hiratsuka-sensei taught you. Megumi Kato's delicate pretty face froze for a moment. She really wanted to say. Hiratsuka-sensei was a responsible homeroom teacher. How could she possibly teach such a self-harming training method? On the other side, Haru continued attacking the wall. Soon, he had thrown over 10 punches. But his fists were already painfully sore. There was even some blood on the wall. Obviously, he had broken the skin. From now on, it would only get more painful. Better to endure short pain than long pain. Haru gritted his teeth and decided to speed up. He couldn't hesitate, or it would only become more difficult. Aura 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 aura. Haru's fists moved faster and faster. Blood flowed from his knuckles. Bloody marks began appearing on the wall. "Haru-kun." Megumi Kato's beautiful eyes showed some sympathy. "You must have misheard. How could Hiratsuka-sensei possibly teach such a strange training method? Don't underestimate Hiratsuka-sensei's teaching, Kato-san." While punching, Haru smiled with difficulty in response to Megumi Kato. "Hiratsuka-sensei said that as long as I persist, it won't be long before I can kill a bull with one punch. Hiratsuka-sensei is so serious and responsible, she definitely wouldn't deceive me." "No, I think she's definitely deceiving you." Megumi Kato sighed, killing a bull with one punch. Even Tyson isn't that amazing. This kind of training method can't possibly be effective. "Haru-kun, your fists are already bleeding. Please stop." "Almost done." Haru's face was somewhat twisted, but he still gritted his teeth and continued. Looking at Haru with blood continuously flowing from his fists yet still persistently gritting his teeth to punch the wall, Megumi Kato saw that his face didn't look like someone venting anger. Instead, he wore a somewhat twisted smile. This scene couldn't help but move Megumi Kato's heart. She suddenly felt that Haru looked like this had a strange kind of charm. Her heart couldn't help but skip a beat, her cheeks slightly reddening as she thought to herself, "Haru-kun really is a strange person." Finished. Haru suddenly stopped, gasping from the pain. However, thinking there was a beautiful girl watching nearby, he still endured it. Haru was a man after all. He needed to save some face. "Haru-kun, you're seriously injured." Megumi Kato couldn't help but say, "You should go to the infirmary quickly." "Wait, let me clean the blood off the wall first." Haru gave a dry laugh. His fist was indeed somewhat injured, already bloody and mangled, requiring bandages. However, the blood on the wall still needed to be cleaned. Otherwise, when classmates returned tomorrow and saw this scene, who knew what chaos would ensue? "Let me help you clean it. We'll go to the infirmary together afterward. In your condition, you definitely can't apply bandages yourself." Megumi Kato offered proactively, then found a cloth and began wiping the wall. TSK, truly worthy of being Saint Megumi. She really had the qualities of a good wife and mother. Haru was moved. Facing a classmate she wasn't very familiar with, she still showed such concern. Compared to Saint Megumi, Haru couldn't help but think of other problem children he knew. Cute was cute, but finding someone as gentle and considerate as Saint Megumi was rare. No wonder in the original story, Saint Megumi could defeat all the other losing heroines. Looking at Saint Megumi's figure, Haru couldn't help but have various thoughts. He had to admit, facing such a Saint Megumi, Haru also felt affection growing. Soon, Megumi Kato had cleaned all the blood traces off the wall. "Thank you, Kato-san." Haru looked at Megumi Kato with a smile on his face. "It's nothing. Let's hurry to the infirmary, Haru-kun." Seeing the blood flowing more and more from Haru's fists, Megumi Kato couldn't help but urge, "Don't train like this next time. Although I'm not good at sports, I know this kind of training will only hurt yourself." "Kato-san, you really misunderstood." Haru showed a mysterious smile. "But it's normal that you don't believe it now. After I finish training, I'll let you see the effects." Megumi Kato was speechless. Did Haru mean he was going to persist with this? However, hearing Haru's tone so determined, she knew her persuasion wouldn't have much effect. After all, she and Haru weren't familiar. If he wouldn't listen after she spoke, why meddle further? Haru and Megumi Kato walked shoulder to shoulder toward the medical room. However, what Haru didn't expect was that this time, he would encounter that person again. "Are you an idiot?" A cool voice, mocking gaze. The girl who seemed to have stepped out of a painting looked at Haru's bleeding hands and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. "Yukino Shita, why haven't you left yet?" Haru looked helplessly at Yukino Shita in front of him. He had encountered this person again. How many times was this today? Yukino Shita didn't answer Haru's boring question, only staring coldly at Haru's fingers. "You didn't really follow Hiratsuka-sensei's words to train, did you? Hiratsuka-sensei was just casually fooling you, and you actually took it seriously. Are you really not an idiot?" The eye-smart Yukino Shita, seeing Haru's fists, was shocked but immediately understood the cause and effect. She was somewhat speechless. She had thought Haru had become smart after seeing his explosive grade improvement earlier. But he had foolishly believed Shizuka Hiratsuka's method. Was this person really stupid or pretending to be stupid? Nearby, Megumi Kato was also somewhat surprised. Had Hiratsuka-sensei really taught Haru such a strange training method? Hearing Yukino Shita say this, it seemed like Hiratsuka-sensei was just joking. But did Haru actually take it seriously? What exactly is going on with Haru? Why would he believe Hiratsuka-sensei's joke? She felt puzzled and also looked at Yukino Shita with concern. Megumi Kato, who was very good at reading people's expressions, could tell that although Yukino Shita's tone was quite unfriendly and full of sarcasm, she could still sense Yukino Shita's concern. Haru actually has such a good relationship with the young lady of Class J, Yukino Shita-san? This discovery surprised Megumi Kato somewhat. Yukino Shita was one of the most famous beautiful girls at Sobu High School. No one had heard of her having a friendly relationship with any male student, not even with female students. Now Megumi Kato knew that Haru actually had a good relationship with Yukino Shita. However, now wasn't the time to discuss these things. "Yukino Shita-san, could we talk about this later? Haru's hand is still injured and needs to be bandaged quickly." Megumi Kato spoke up at the right moment. Yukino Shita's pretty face changed slightly, and she was startled. There was someone else nearby? She couldn't help but look toward Megumi Kato who had spoken. The next moment, her beautiful eyes froze. Such a pretty girl. Even with Yukino Shita's confidence in her own appearance, she had to admit that this girl's looks were not inferior to her own. What was strange, though, was why she had never heard of this girl before. Moreover, with such high attractiveness, standing right in front of her, she hadn't even noticed her just now. What was going on? Chapter 18, Intimate Moments During Treatment. Another bet with Yukino Shita. "This is Kato-san, Megumi Kato from our class. Seeing the astonishment in Yukino Shita's eyes, Haru chuckled inwardly, figuring this girl had also been startled, but still introduced them to each other. Hello, Kato-san, I'm Yukino Shita from Class 1 Jewel. Yukino Shita nodded calmly, but mentally noted this girl whose presence was terrifyingly low. Hello, Yukino Shita-san, I've heard of you long ago since you're such a famous person. Megumi Kato showed a kind smile. Yukino Shita wasn't surprised by her fame and didn't modestly claim that Megumi Kato was flattering her. Instead, she glanced at Haru. Let's go to the infirmary first. Then she took the initiative to follow beside the two of them. Haru looked at Yukino Shita with surprise. You're coming too? Did you forget? The service club's purpose is to lend a helping hand to students in need. Yukino Shita snorted coldly. Yukino Shita-san really is a good person. Haru clicked his tongue in amazement. This girl was really cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Despite having quite a conflict earlier, she was still willing to help him. Soon, the three of them arrived at the infirmary. At this time, the infirmary teacher had long since left. Megumi Kato took out the medical kit, got bandages and band-aids, and began actively bandaging Haru's right hand. Her delicate body leaned against Haru's side, head lowered, carefully bandaging Haru's fingers. Looking at Megumi Kato's fair pretty face and feeling the soft little hands touching his fingers, plus smelling the faint fragrance emanating from the girl, Haru's heart began to race. His face became somewhat unnatural. It had to be said that being in close contact with a beautiful girl like Saint Megumi was quite stimulating for Haru. Although Haru had awakened his memories and focused single-mindedly on a system without much thought about romance, he was still a male after all. His masculine instincts remained, and he simply couldn't resist a beautiful girl like Megumi Kato who was delicate and gentle. For a moment, his expression became somewhat unnatural. Just then, Haru suddenly felt a pain in his left hand. Instantly, those subtle thoughts in his heart dissipated. He couldn't help but let out a hiss of pain and look to the other side. He saw that his other hand was being gripped mercilessly by Yukino Shita. She was holding medical supplies in her other hand, but her beautiful eyes were looking coldly at Haru. Haru, Kato-san is kindly helping you bandage your wounds. You wouldn't be thinking of looking at Kato-san with those perverted eyes, would you? Originally, Yukino Shita had planned to help Haru bandage his other hand, but seeing Haru staring at Megumi Kato with lustful eyes, she immediately became alert, worried that Haru might use his perspective eyes on Megumi Kato. So she applied a bit more force with her hand, secretly warning Haru. Hey, how can you make such baseless accusations against me? Haru looked at Yukino Shita with annoyance. Wasn't it just looking at you once? Did you need to be on guard like guarding against a thief every time? Moreover, last time was something you actively requested, so you can't blame me for that. Repaying kindness with enmity isn't good behavior. Yukino Shita snorted coldly, but her movements became gentler. Just now she only wanted to warn Haru, not to make him suffer more. Yukino Shita-san and Haru really have a good relationship. Hearing their conversation, Megumi Kato raised her head and couldn't help but speak. Yukino Shita was stunned for a moment, then immediately said expressionlessly, Kato-san, you've misunderstood. No matter what, I couldn't possibly have a friendly relationship with a certain perverted alien, and I'm not familiar with him either. Kato-san, my relationship with you is much better than my relationship with this girl. Haru also said with annoyance. Before he finished speaking, he felt Yukino Shita's small hand apply more force. He immediately grimaced in pain. Yukino Shita snorted coldly. Although she didn't think her relationship with Haru was very good either, Haru comparing her to other girls made her somewhat displeased. It wasn't that she had any feelings for Haru, but purely because Yukino Shita's nature was extremely competitive and didn't like being compared unfavorably to people of the same sex. Megumi Kato smiled lightly. How could people who weren't familiar with each other have such conversations and behaviors? Then she said, Yukino Shita-san, I think you should properly advise Haru. After all, if that strange training method continues, it might affect Haru's studies. Kato-san, you have to understand that we cannot comprehend the thinking of idiots. Yukino Shita glanced at Haru. Anyone with even slightly normal intelligence wouldn't take a teacher's joke seriously and actually do it foolishly. In fact, I also cannot understand how there could be such stupid people in the world. Yukino Shita, you've gone too far. Haru couldn't stand it anymore. She actually called him an idiot. Calling me an idiot. If I'm an idiot, then what are you, who lost the club room to me? Something worse than an idiot? Hearing Haru mention the club room incident, Yukino Shita's small face immediately flushed red. She glared at Haru and said through gritted teeth, you still have the nerve to mention that. I lost the club room to you entirely because you took advantage of an information gap, Not because you're smarter than me. If we did it again, I definitely wouldn't fall for your trick. You could win if we did it again? Haru chuckled. Stop dreaming. Even if we did it again, you couldn't possibly beat me. If you don't believe it, let's bet again, using the club room as the stakes. Yukino Shita's face flushed red with anger as she glared fiercely at Haru. Conceited fool, since you want to humiliate yourself, I'll fulfill your wish. Yukino Shita was very unconvinced. Wasn't it just winning against her once? How could he be so arrogant? She was Yukino Shita, someone with first-class talent and appearance. How could she possibly lose to Haru again? Moreover, hearing that Haru was willing to use the club room as stakes, she was secretly delighted. This time she could take back her large classroom. Didn't you say that the boxing method Hiratsuka-sensei taught me was useless? Haru's face showed a hint of a sinister smile. Let's bet on this. 2 weeks from now, if I can train to the point where I can punch through the classroom wall with one fist, that means Hiratsuka-sensei's suggestion was useful, and I win. If I can't train to that level, then I lose, and I'll exchange club rooms with you. You actually want to bet on this? Yukino Shita was stunned for a moment, then looked at Haru with a strange expression. With this kind of bet, she had absolutely no possibility of losing, right? Could this guy Haru not be pretending to be stupid, but actually be genuinely stupid? He actually believed Shizuka Hiratsuka's joke. Chapter 19, Megami Kato as witness, commotion in Class F, Rizu Ogata comes calling Flying Dragon rides face, how to lose. At this moment, that was exactly what Yukino Shita was thinking. She somewhat suspected that Haru might really have something wrong with his brain. Anyone with even slightly normal intelligence wouldn't believe what Shizuka Hiratsuka said, right? He actually believed it and dared to bet on this with her? How ridiculous. Are you sure you want to bet on this? Yukino Shita raised her slender eyebrows, her clear beautiful eyes showing a look as if she were looking at an idiot. Haru was being stupid, but she wasn't stupid. If Haru really agreed to bet on this with her, she would naturally be more than happy to accept. With this kind of betting method, she could definitely get the club room back with 100% certainty, without any suspense. Of course. Seeing Yukino Shita's confident and smug appearance, Haru almost laughed out loud. Little girl, I won't teach you a harsh lesson this time. Let's see if you'll dare to be arrogant in front of me in the future. However, the stakes must be equal. Haru smiled slightly. If I lose, I have to give you the large classroom, so if you lose, you must also give up something, right? I can't possibly lose. Yukino Shita's lips curved upward, her exquisite pretty face showing a charming smile, full of confidence in victory. What do you want? Just say it. She didn't think she had any possibility of losing, so naturally she dared to make big promises. It seemed like as long as Haru's demands were too excessive, she could agree to them. Of course, Haru knew that if he made demands that were too outrageous, Yukino Shita would probably become suspicious. It would be harder to trick her then. Therefore, this demand had to be appropriate. After thinking briefly, Haru came up with his demand, his eyes showing a somewhat mischievous look. How about 100 times? Yukino Shita was puzzled. What do you mean? If you lose, I'll use my heterochromia to look at you 100 times. Haru deliberately showed a provocative expression, as if to say let's see if you dare. Hearing Haru mention the heterochromia, the pride on Yukino Shita's pretty face instantly froze. Then, an alluring pink color filled her face that was smooth as cream and fair as jade. Her clear eyes were immediately occupied by shame and annoyance. Her delicate body trembled slightly as she glared at Haru with clenched silver teeth. Perverted, lewd demon, you actually dare to make such a request. Haru chuckled inwardly, knowing that Yukino Shita would react this way. That's why he didn't make an even more excessive demand. In Yukino Shita's eyes, this bet was almost a guaranteed win for her, but when Haru proposed using his heterochromia to look at her as the stakes, she had such a big reaction. If Haru had made demands with an even larger scale, no matter how high Yukino Shita's chances of winning this bet were, she probably wouldn't agree. Just say whether you dare or not. Haru continued to provoke Yukino Shita, acting like she was a coward. Yukino Shita's delicate body trembled with anger, her cheeks flushed red, glaring at Haru through gritted teeth. Even the hand bandaging Haru unconsciously applied more force. Fine, let's bet. Yukino Shita had originally been somewhat hesitant, but seeing Haru's arrogant attitude, she immediately became displeased. She secretly resolved to make this shameless guy fall hard this time. Anyway, with this bet, she had absolutely no possibility of losing. No matter how perverted his thoughts were, they couldn't possibly come true. What was there to be afraid of? Thinking this, the shame and annoyance on her cheeks faded away, replaced by a cold smile, her beautiful eyes full of a just-you-wait-and-see expression. as if she could already see Haru's defeat. Very good. Haru smiled slightly and turned to look at Megumi Kato beside him. Kato-san, please be the witness for this bet. Without a witness, what if Yuki no Shita backed out later? Megumi Kato's pretty face was currently full of confusion. She didn't understand what the situation was with their conversation. Logically speaking, the stakes of their bet were completely unequal. If Haru lost, he would give the club room to Yuki no Shita. But if Yuki no Shita lost, she would just be looked at by Haru 100 times. Although she didn't understand what that heterochromia thing was about, no matter how you looked at it, being stared at 100 times wouldn't have too much impact, right? Why did Yuki no Shita react so strongly? Megumi Kato felt puzzled and hadn't figured out the situation when Haru asked her to be the witness. She didn't know how to respond. But at this time, Yuki no Shita also looked over. Although she didn't speak, she obviously didn't object to having Megumi Kato as the witness. How could Megumi Kato not understand that she was definitely going to be this witness? I don't object to being a witness or anything. After only a slight hesitation, Megumi Kato nodded lightly. Her bright eyes looked at Haru with confusion. No matter how you looked at this bet, Haru had absolutely no possibility of victory. So why would he make this bet? Could it really be as Yuki no Shita-san said, that something was wrong with Haru's brain? But Megumi Kato had a feeling that the truth wasn't like that. Perhaps in 2 weeks, we'll be able to know the answer. Even though this was the first time talking with both Haru and Yuki no Shita, Megumi Kato already had a deep impression of both of them. Unconsciously, she began to look forward to their confrontation, wanting to know who would come out on top. After discussing the bet, Haru's bandages were also finished. Haru had originally planned to invite the two for dinner as thanks, and of course, the object of gratitude wasn't just Megumi Kato, but also Yuki no Shita. That aside, Haru was still somewhat moved by Yuki no Shita's help and planned to repay her. However, thinking about his current situation, he decided to postpone it for now, planning to invite them after his injury healed a bit more. Today, he let it go. In the blink of an eye, it was already the next day. Haru carried his school bag and yawned with his bandaged hand as he entered the classroom. Worthy of the strength of one ox task, the effects are so good. Thinking about the changes in his body, Haru felt somewhat surprised. He had only done the task for 1 day, but his body had already undergone significant transformation. Specifically, his stamina was much more abundant. The weakness from being hospitalized had completely disappeared. He felt that his body was full of strength, and he could easily lift 2 buckets of water. Moreover, he felt his skin had become somewhat thicker. Yesterday, due to practicing punches, the skin on his knuckles had cracked, and after bandaging, he still felt pain from time to time. But after 1 night, he felt his fingers had mostly recovered. If not for the scabs looking somewhat frightening, taking off the bandages wouldn't be a problem at all. By the time I completely finish this suggestion, my physique will probably be like a little Superman. Completing the task once had already brought such great transformation. Haru eagerly anticipated the day when he would completely finish the task. When the day came to complete Shizuka Hiratsuka's suggestion, Haru would not only gain extraordinary physical abilities but also witness the day Yuki no Shita became a defeated dog. Just thinking about it was exciting. However, while Haru was secretly pleased, he didn't realize how conspicuous his bandaged hand was in the eyes of other students in the classroom. Many students looked at Haru with surprise and suspicion. They began to whisper among themselves. What happened to his hand? Could he have gotten into a fight? How scary, so there are delinquents in our class too. But I heard that Haru was hospitalized for a month after a car accident. Given his physical condition, he probably wouldn't get into fights with others. Then was he bullied? The students discussed among themselves. Although few people dared to approach Haru because of Rikata Kanashi, many people still secretly paid attention to him because of his handsome appearance. Seeing Haru's current severely injured state immediately caused quite a bit of discussion. However, because of Haru's bad reputation, there was little sympathy in those discussions, mostly just people watching the excitement. TSK, that Haru is really pitiful. He's injured so badly, but no one cares about him. The popular group led by Hayato Hayama and Yumeko Mira were also chatting together at the moment. Noticing Haru's situation, Yamato, Hayato Hayama's follower, curled his lips. As a sports enthusiast, Yamato looked down on handsome pretty boys other than Hayato Hayama. His tone carried a hint of mockery. After speaking, he looked at the handsome and elegant Hayato Hayama beside him, his face showing a smile. If Hayato had gotten injured like this, all the girls in the class would definitely have surrounded him. Hearing this, Yui Uegahama's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly concealed it and didn't say anything. Yamato, don't say that. Hayato Hayama's handsome face showed an elegant smile. When a classmate is injured, we should be concerned about him, not make sarcastic remarks here. Well, I was just joking. Yamato raised his hands with a dry laugh. Actually, if that Haru wasn't so eccentric and didn't hang around with Chuunibyou like Takanashi, maybe what Yamato said would really happen. Beside them, the fashionable Jyaru with beautiful blonde hair, Yumiko Miura, glanced at Yui Uegahama without expression. People who don't understand school social rules end up like this. Yui Uegahama bit her lips, her small hands clenched tightly. Being good at reading people's expressions, she understood that Yumiko Miura was taking the opportunity to remind her. This was what happened when you associated with people with bad reputations. Obviously, her attention to Haru hadn't escaped the eyes of Yumiko Miura, the campus queen. After all, someone who could become the apex of the popular crowd, how could their ability to read others' thoughts be weaker than hers? Just then, the classroom suddenly became noisy. The popular group was first puzzled, then they all noticed that everyone in the class was looking toward the back door of the classroom. Hayato Hayama, Yumiko Miura, and the others couldn't help but look over. Then they were stunned. At the door stood a cute, petite beautiful girl. Everyone almost immediately recognized this beautiful girl's identity. The Thumbelina of science, the science genius that even honor students could only look up to, Rizu Ogata. Why would this person, who was not only a genius but also a beautiful girl, appear at the door of Class F's classroom? Everyone was puzzled, and then they were even more surprised to discover that Rizu Ogata currently had a shy expression on her face, holding a bento box in her hands. Could it be a confession? The popular boys Yamato, Tobekakeru, and Tuka couldn't help but look at Hayato Hayama. Yumiko Miura and Hina Ebina also couldn't help but look at Hayato Hayama. Hayato Hayama scratched his head. As the apex of the popular crowd, Hayato Hayama naturally knew why these people were looking at him. Oh, Rizu Ogata must be here to confess to Hayama. The boys immediately started making noise, with Tobekakeru showing a mischievous smile on his face. That's right, in our Class F, only Hayama is qualified to receive a confession from the science Thumbelina. Yamato's eyes showed a hint of envy. A sports enthusiast like him could never attract a confession from a scholarly beautiful girl. Hayama, you're really something. That's Thumbelina Rizu Ogata. Uka also gave a thumbs up, showing admiring eyes. Yumiko Miura frowned. Since it was only about a month into the first year, Yumiko Miura hadn't developed feelings for Hayato Hayama like she had in the original second-year period. But as the apex among girls, she also felt that only Hayato Hayama was worthy of her. Although she didn't have much affection for Hayato Hayama yet, she didn't want to see other girls taking over Hayato Hayama either. Women, like men, have the desire to possess excellent members of the opposite sex. And like everyone else thought, she also believed that Rizu Ogata looked like she was coming to confess to Hayato Hayama. After all, Class F had nothing special about it at Sobya High, unlike Class J, which was an elite class where children of prestigious families gathered. Besides Hayato Hayama, who else would Rizu Ogata be interested in? Even Hayato Hayama thought so. He was a bit hesitant, not knowing how to respond to Rizu Ogata later. At this time, Rizu Ogata walked into the classroom. The classroom immediately fell silent. Everyone's gaze fell on Rizu Ogata. Some also looked at Hayato Hayama with envy. Chapter 20, Embarrassed Popular Group, Strange Atmosphere in the Study Group. Seeing Rizu Ogata step into the classroom, almost everyone's gaze turned to Hayato Hayama. No one doubted that Rizu Ogata's confession target would be Hayato Hayama. Tobekakeru, Uka, Yamato, and the other followers of Hayato Hayama all showed smiles on their faces, already preparing to join in the commotion. With these popular kids taking the lead, undoubtedly, the other students in the class would have to cheer along with them. As if anticipating what was about to happen, Hayato Hayama couldn't help but show his trademark elegant smile to Rizu Ogata. Having experienced many similar situations, Hayato Hayama was already accustomed to handling such scenes. He was preparing to stand up. However, the next moment, his movement froze. At the same time, his followers, as well as the popular girls like Yumiko Miura beside them, all had their expressions stiffen. All the many students in the class who were waiting to watch the excitement and make noise had rigid expressions. They saw that after Rizu Ogata walked into the classroom, she didn't look in Hayato Hayama's direction at all. Instead, she went straight toward the corner of the classroom. After a few steps, that slender, petite, cute figure stopped in front of someone that no one had expected. Haru, this is the promised bento. Rizu Ogata's cheeks were slightly red as she lowered her head embarrassedly. Her small hands handed the bento box to Haru. Yesterday, when Haru agreed to tutor her, she had already thought about being responsible for Haru's bento every day. So early in the morning, she got up and carefully made her specialty homemade udon noodles for Haru. Originally, she just considered this as a return gift, but when she came to the entrance of Class F's classroom, she realized that her actions seemed to be somewhat misunderstood, and she immediately became shy. Thank you, my appetite has increased quite a bit recently. Looking at the substantial bento box, Haru's eyes couldn't help but brighten. After his physique was enhanced, his appetite had also grown much larger. Rizuogata preparing such a large portion of udon noodles was really perfect timing. He reached out to take the udon noodles. The bandages on his hand were immediately seen by Rizuogata, and her expression changed slightly. "Haru, what happened to your hand?" Rizuogata's pretty face immediately showed a worried expression, and her small hands immediately grasped Haru's hand, wanting to see clearly what was wrong with Haru. "He clearly wasn't injured yesterday. I got a small injury while exercising yesterday, it's not a big deal." Haru chuckled and casually explained. Only then did Rizuogata breathe a sigh of relief. At this time, she realized her action of grasping Haru's hand, and quickly withdrew her hands, embarrassedly turning her head away, her face full of shy expressions. And in the classroom, the students who were originally shocked by Rizuogata going straight to Haru, seeing Rizuogata intimately grasping Haru's hand and showing such concern, all felt like they were being fed dog food. Shock, disbelief, and envy, jealousy, and hatred. Actually, Haru is dating that Rizuogata. Unbelievable, when did this happen? Damn it, Haru has only been back at school for a few days, and he's already caught such a cute girl. Some boys were so envious and jealous they were falling apart. The girls also let out gossipy screams, all pricking up their ears, wanting to hear the gossip. However, things were a bit awkward for Hayato Hayama's side. Hayato Hayama's smile was somewhat stiff. His face was burning. After all, just now he also thought Rizuogata was coming to confess to him, and had prepared to stand up and respond to Rizuogata. Unexpectedly, he was being presumptuous. Rizuogata wasn't coming to find him at all, she didn't even glance at him. His several followers also looked unwell at the moment. Especially Yamato. His face looked even worse, not daring to look at others. Just now, he had been sarcastically saying that Haru was pitiful with no one caring about him. As a result, now Rizuogata, such a scholarly beautiful girl, was holding his hand and showing such concern. It completely slapped him in the face. Yumeko Mira also felt the embarrassment of being slapped in the face, her face burning. After all, she had also indirectly hinted to Yuiyu Agahama that no one would approach Haru with his bad reputation. As a result, immediately afterward, such an excellent girl as Rizuogata appeared. Although Yumeko Mira was popular and extremely popular in the class, compared to Rizuogata, she was still far behind. Rizuogata was a science genius that even the school board extremely valued. As a popular girl, compared to her, she was far inferior in weight. However, Yuiyu Agahama didn't feel like saying anything to Yumeko Mira at the moment. Seeing that Haru had a girl like Rizuogata caring about him, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But she also looked at Rizuogata with some envy. Envying her courage, unlike herself, who until now didn't dare to talk to Haru. The reactions of these students who weren't familiar with Haru were mostly gossip. In the classroom, there were also two people whose thoughts were different. Rikata Kanashi, sitting in the front row, was now looking straight at Haru and Rizuogata with her gem-like eyes. Her small mouth was pouting, her pretty face full of unhappiness. Because of yesterday's incident, she was too shy to talk to Haru. But unexpectedly, in just one day, there was already another intimate girl beside Haru. She felt empty in her heart, with a feeling that something had been taken away. No, I can't go on like this. A determined look flashed in Rikata Kanashi's beautiful eyes, not knowing what she was thinking. Another person with different thoughts was Megumi Kato. She was now looking at Haru with full curiosity, first Yukino Shita-san, now Ogata-san, actually having such excellent girls intimately related to Haru. Haru, what kind of person are you exactly? At this moment, Megumi Kato became even more interested in Haru. After all, excellent people often gather with excellent people. For Haru to have two very excellent beautiful girls approach him, there must be something special about him. Megumi Kato now really wanted to understand what was special about Haru. Haru naturally noticed the strange atmosphere in the class and was aware that Rizuogata bringing him a bento would probably cause quite a stir. After all, Rizuogata was too famous. Having a relationship with such a person couldn't possibly go unnoticed. However, he was too lazy to care about these things. Haru's current thoughts only had one focus: quickly complete the remaining two suggestions and upgrade the system. With the system upgrade, he could get even greater benefits. However, while Haru didn't care, Rizuogata couldn't help but pay attention. The discussions among the surrounding students were getting louder and more outrageous. Rizuogata was also a pure girl. How could she have experienced such a situation? Immediately, her face turned completely red, and she hurriedly escaped from Class F, not daring to stay any longer. However, once rumors started, they could never be stopped. Throughout the morning, rumors about Haru and Rizuogata's intimate relationship spread like wildfire throughout the entire first year. Haru acted like nothing had happened, and as usual, went directly to the classroom where the study group was located. However, as soon as he arrived at the classroom, he discovered that the atmosphere was a bit heavy. Both Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata were hanging their heads with somewhat unpleasant expressions. Mifagirasu, sitting on the podium, had no expression whatsoever on her exquisitely beautiful face. Her sapphire-like magnificent pupils were filled with coldness, watching Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata below. Her arms were crossed, hugging her shoulders, and under her smooth black stockings, her high heels wrapping those alluring jade feet were now lightly tapping the ground. This indicated that Mifagirasu was currently feeling somewhat impatient. What was going on? Haru muttered to himself, feeling like he might have come at a bad time. Chapter 21, Mifagirasu's Request. Despair of Furuhashi and Ogata. Just when Haru felt strange, Mifagirasu noticed Haru outside. Seeing Haru, the coldness in her eyes immediately dissipated quite a bit, and her stern face also became somewhat gentler. Come in, Haru. Girasu-sensei. Haru gave a dry laugh and walked in, sitting beside Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata. Only then did he understand why the atmosphere was so tense. He saw that on the test papers in front of Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata, there were still pitifully low single-digit scores. It had been more than a week of tutoring, and in the two subjects that Mifagirasu was tutoring, Haru's grades had progressed from just over 60 points to one subject with a perfect score and another close to perfect. However, Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata had basically made no progress. Any teacher would be angry about this. Not to mention there was Haru's example of rapid progress right here. Combined with Mifagirasu's own circumstances, Haru had already guessed the real situation with about 80 to 90% accuracy. Mifagirasu looked at Haru with increasingly satisfied eyes, but then, glancing at the other two hanging their heads, Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata, a look of frustration flashed through her beautiful eyes. But she didn't say much more, coldly saying, "Let's begin." During the tutoring session, Mifagirasu had earnestly explained all the wrong answers. After finishing the explanation, she announced, "Next tutoring session, we'll test world history and physics. Haru, please stay behind for a moment." "Goodbye, Girasu-sensei." Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata stood up as if relieved of a burden, seeming to want to escape the tutoring room as quickly as possible. However, hearing that Haru was being kept behind, both looked at Haru with some concern. "Haru, you've made great progress recently. I can see that you've been working very hard lately." When only the two of them remained in the classroom, Mifagirasu's cold gaze became much gentler, her beautiful eyes full of appreciation as she looked at the young man before her. In just over a week, his grades had improved so rapidly. Such progress undoubtedly made Mifagirasu very satisfied. Moreover, since she was responsible for tutoring Haru, this also brought her considerable sense of achievement as a teacher. Thanks to Girasu-sensei's guidance. Haru smiled slightly and answered modestly. He knew clearly in his heart that his grade changes were mainly due to cheating, and didn't have that much to do with Mifagirasu. But he wouldn't say such things. After all, Mifagirasu was giving him free tutoring, and Haru was still grateful to her. No need to be too modest, Haru. The biggest reason for your progress is that you work hard enough yourself. My teaching effectiveness isn't that good. Mifagirasu smiled faintly. She knew clearly in her heart that even if her tutoring was effective, it wouldn't be possible for an ordinary student to make such great progress. Obviously, the reason lay with Haru himself. However, Haru's progress made her think of Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata, who had made no progress at all, making her mood even more unpleasant. "Haru, I kept you behind because I want to ask you to help me with something." She looked at Haru, her pretty face showing a hint of expectation. "Does sensei want me to persuade Furuhashi-san and Ogata-san?" Haru looked directly at Mifagirasu and smiled slightly, stating his guess. After all, the atmosphere in the classroom earlier had already explained everything. Haru estimated that before he arrived at the classroom, Mifagirasu had probably already had some unpleasant conversation with Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata. "You really are smart, Haru." Mifagirasu was first surprised, then looked at Haru approvingly. She hadn't expected the student to not only have rapidly rising grades but also be so good at reading people's hearts. If she had such ability, she probably wouldn't have had such a strained relationship with Fumino Furuhashi and Rizu Ogata. Thinking of this, a bitter smile appeared on her face. "That's right, I want Furuhashi and Ogata to give up their boring dreams. Their talent in subjects they're not good at is simply terrible." Her gem-like magnificent eyes fell on Haru, her beautiful eyes full of expectation. If they were ordinary students, that would be fine. But they both have talents that surpass ordinary people. Giving up their own talents to do things with absolutely no hope is wasting their precious time. Mifagirasu took a deep breath, then stated the real reason she kept Haru behind. "Haru, you have a good relationship with Furuhashi and Ogata. I think you clearly understand how talented they are, and you know how wrong it is for them to waste their gifts. So I hope you can persuade them to give up those unrealistic dreams. If possible, Mufagirasu certainly wouldn't ask Haru to help her say such things. But she had already tried to persuade the two before, and as a result, Furuashi and Ogata had reacted strongly, completely unwilling to listen. Mufagirasu thought it was because she was a teacher that made the students rebellious, so she placed her hopes on Haru. Haru and the two were peers, so the words he said should be something Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata could listen to. When Mufagirasu placed her hopes on Haru, she didn't notice that the door to the tutoring room wasn't completely closed. Outside, two pairs of small ears were quietly eavesdropping on the conversation here. That's too much, Garasu-sensei. Outside the tutoring room, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's faces were full of anger and worry. Before today's tutoring class, Mufagirasu had demanded that the two give up changing their college preferences, but they had persisted in their opinions and hadn't agreed. Unexpectedly, Mufagirasu still wouldn't give up and actually wanted to have Haru persuade them. What should we do? Haru won't agree to Garasu-sensei's request, will he? Fumino Furuashi looked at Rizu Ogata with worry, speaking in a low voice. He probably won't. Rizu Ogata said uncertainly, her mood becoming very heavy. Both knew clearly that actually Mufagirasu didn't dislike them, but rather was someone who cared about them very much. That's why she was frustrated with them and hoped they wouldn't waste their talents. So, if Haru, like other people who cared about them, might also agree to Mufagirasu's request to persuade them. But this was exactly what they didn't want. Persisting in one's dreams isn't wrong. Rizu Ogata took a deep breath, her beautiful eyes full of determination. Even if Haru is convinced, I won't change my college preference. Me too. Fumino Furuashi also nodded firmly, but then said worriedly, but Haru agreed to help us with tutoring. If he agrees with Garasu-sensei, will he change his mind? Rizu Ogata pressed her lips together, her small face also tightening. This was also what she was worried about. Although Haru had agreed to them before, with this happening, Haru might very well be convinced by Mufagirasu and change his mind. However, both knew in their hearts that not everyone could be like them, persisting in their own opinions in front of the stern Garasu-sensei. Especially someone like Haru, such a good student. Yes, in the hearts of Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, Haru was a very perfect good student. Haru's academic progress was rapid, and his teacher-student relationship with Mufagirasu was much more harmonious than theirs. How could such a good student refuse a request made by a beautiful teacher? Moreover, this was for the good of his classmates, such a noble reason. Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's hearts were filled with despair, their small faces pale. Both felt that the situation was already decided. They were already prepared to face a future where they would be abandoned by the whole world, abandoned by Haru. And at this time, Haru's voice came from inside the door crack. Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's hearts immediately seized up. Chapter 21, Mufagirasu's Request, Despair of Furuashi and Ogata. Just when Haru felt strange, Mufagirasu noticed Haru outside. Seeing Haru, the coldness in her eyes immediately dissipated quite a bit, and her stern face also became somewhat gentler. Come in, Haru. Garasu-sensei. Haru gave a dry laugh and walked in, sitting beside Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata. Only then did he understand why the atmosphere was so tense. He saw that on the test papers in front of Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, there were still pitifully low single-digit scores. It had been more than a week of tutoring, and in the two subjects that Mufagirasu was tutoring, Haru's grades had progressed from just over 60 points to one subject with a perfect score and another close to perfect. However, Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata had basically made no progress. Any teacher would be angry about this. Not to mention there was Haru's example of rapid progress right here. Combined with Mufagirasu's own circumstances, Haru had already guessed the real situation with about 80 to 90% accuracy. Mufagirasu looked at Haru with increasingly satisfied eyes, but then, glancing at the other two hanging their heads, Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, a look of frustration flashed through her beautiful eyes. But she didn't say much more, coldly saying, "Let's begin." During the tutoring session, Mufagirasu had earnestly explained all the wrong answers. After finishing the explanation, she announced, "Next tutoring session, we'll test world history and physics. Haru, please stay behind for a moment." "Goodbye, Garasu-sensei." Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata stood up as if relieved of a burden, seeming to want to escape the tutoring room as quickly as possible. However, hearing that Haru was being kept behind, both looked at Haru with some concern. "Haru, you've made great progress recently. I can see that you've been working very hard lately." When only the two of them remained in the classroom, Mufagirasu's cold gaze became much gentler, her beautiful eyes full of appreciation as she looked at the young man before her. In just over a week, his grades had improved so rapidly. Such progress undoubtedly made Mufagirasu very satisfied. Moreover, since she was responsible for tutoring Haru, This also brought her considerable sense of achievement as a teacher. Thanks to Kirasu-sensei's guidance. Haru smiled slightly and answered modestly. He knew clearly in his heart that his grade changes were mainly due to cheating, and didn't have that much to do with Mifagirasu. But he wouldn't say such things. After all, Mifagirasu was giving him free tutoring, and Haru was still grateful to her. No need to be too modest, Haru. The biggest reason for your progress is that you work hard enough yourself. My teaching effectiveness isn't that good. Mifagirasu smiled faintly. She knew clearly in her heart that even if her tutoring was effective, it wouldn't be possible for an ordinary student to make such great progress. Obviously, the reason lay with Haru himself. However, Haru's progress made her think of Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, who had made no progress at all, making her mood even more unpleasant. Haru, I kept you behind because I want to ask you to help me with something. She looked at Haru, her pretty face showing a hint of expectation. Does sensei want me to persuade Furuashi-san and Ogata-san? Haru looked directly at Mifagirasu and smiled slightly, stating his guess. After all, the atmosphere in the classroom earlier had already explained everything. Haru estimated that before he arrived at the classroom, Mifagirasu had probably already had some unpleasant conversation with Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata. You really are smart, Haru. Mifagirasu was first surprised, then looked at Haru approvingly. She hadn't expected the student to not only have rapidly rising grades but also be so good at reading people's hearts. If she had such ability, she probably wouldn't have had such a strained relationship with Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata. Thinking of this, a bitter smile appeared on her face. That's right, I want Furuashi and Ogata to give up their boring dreams. Their talent in subjects they're not good at is simply terrible. Her gem-like magnificent eyes fell on Haru, her beautiful eyes full of expectation. If they were ordinary students, that would be fine, but they both have talents that surpass ordinary people. Giving up their own talents to do things with absolutely no hope is wasting their precious time. Mifagirasu took a deep breath, then stated the real reason she kept Haru behind. Haru, you have a good relationship with Furuashi and Ogata. I think you clearly understand how talented they are, and you know how wrong it is for them to waste their gifts. So I hope you can persuade them to give up those unrealistic dreams. If possible, Mifagirasu certainly wouldn't ask Haru to help her say such things. But she had already tried to persuade the two before, and as a result, Furuashi and Ogata had reacted strongly, completely unwilling to listen. Mifagirasu thought it was because she was a teacher that made the students rebellious, so she placed her hopes on Haru. Haru and the two were peers, so the words he said should be something Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata could listen to. When Mifagirasu placed her hopes on Haru, she didn't notice that the door to the tutoring room wasn't completely closed. Outside, two pairs of small ears were quietly eavesdropping on the conversation here. That's too much, Kirasu-sensei. Outside the tutoring room, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's faces were full of anger and worry. Before today's tutoring class, Mifagirasu had demanded that the two give up changing their college preferences, but they had persisted in their opinions and hadn't agreed. Unexpectedly, Mifagirasu still wouldn't give up and actually wanted to have Haru persuade them. What should we do? Haru won't agree to Kirasu-sensei's request, will he? Fumino Furuashi looked at Rizu Ogata with worry, speaking in a low voice. He probably won't. Rizu Ogata said uncertainly, her mood becoming very heavy. Both knew clearly that actually Mifagirasu didn't dislike them, but rather was someone who cared about them very much. That's why she was frustrated with them and hoped they wouldn't waste their talents. So, if Haru, like other people who cared about them, might also agree to Mifagirasu's request to persuade them. But this was exactly what they didn't want. Persisting in one's dreams isn't wrong. Rizu Ogata took a deep breath, her beautiful eyes full of determination. Even if Haru is convinced, I won't change my college preference. Me too. Fumino Furuashi also nodded firmly, but then said worriedly, but Haru agreed to help us with tutoring. If he agrees with Kirasu-sensei, will he change his mind? Rizu Ogata pressed her lips together, her small face also tightening. This was also what she was worried about. Although Haru had agreed to them before, with this happening, Haru might very well be convinced by Mifagirasu and change his mind. However, both knew in their hearts that not everyone could be like them, persisting in their own opinions in front of the stern Kirasu-sensei. Especially someone like Haru, such a good student. Yes, in the hearts of Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata, Haru was a very perfect good student. Haru's academic progress was rapid, and his teacher-student relationship with Mifagirasu was much more harmonious than theirs. How could such a good student refuse a request made by a beautiful teacher? Moreover, this was for the good of his classmates, such a noble reason. Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata's hearts were filled with despair, their small faces pale. Both felt that the situation was already decided. They were already prepared to face a future where they would be abandoned by the whole world, abandoned by Haru. And at this time, Haru's voice came from inside the door crack. Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata's hearts immediately seized up. Chapter 22, Haru makes a military pledge. Furuashi and Ogata are stunned. Big brother, we're not that amazing. I'm sorry, Garasu-sensei, I can't say such things. Facing Mufagarasu's request, Haru sighed and apologetically gave his answer. He was very clear about how determined Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata's intentions were. With his current relationship with the two, it would be impossible to convince them. Once he opened his mouth about this, he could forget about improving his bond values with the two in the future. However, Haru's thoughts were unknown to others. Moreover, he also admired Rizugata and Fumino Furuashi's persistence. After all, their dreams weren't just talk, but something they truly persisted in doing. Facing countless people around them trying to stop them, they had never given up. For people who persisted like this, Haru couldn't say words to persuade them to change their dreams. Outside, Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata's expressions immediately froze. Then, both their beautiful eyes filled with incredible emotion and excitement. They had both thought Haru would agree to Mufagarasu's request, and never expected that Haru would actually refuse. Haru. Fumino Furuashi's eyes welled up with tears of excitement, her heart full of gratitude. Rizugata's pretty face was also full of excited smiles. She clenched her small hands. I knew I was right about Haru. Yet just a few seconds ago, she had firmly believed Haru would defect to the enemy. Inside the classroom, the expectant look on Mufagarasu's pretty face disappeared. Disappointment, confusion, and anger appeared one by one. Finally, that cold face became expressionless as she looked at Haru. Why? Garasu-sensei, I don't think people who persist in their dreams are wrong. Haru looked directly into Mufagarasu's incredibly beautiful eyes without any fear, saying, moreover, Furuashi-san and Ogata-san are serious and unwavering about their dreams. I also don't think I could convince them to change their determination. Haru certainly knew that the Mufagarasu before him was also such a person. So he knew very clearly that Mufagarasu would definitely understand what he was saying. I didn't expect Haru to understand us so well. Outside the door, Fumino Furuashi's pretty face was slightly red. Hearing these words, she felt somewhat moved and a bit shy. After all, this was exactly what she thought in her heart, but no one had ever understood her. Even her biological father didn't take her dreams seriously and repeatedly mocked her. Now that someone who could understand her appeared, how could she not be moved? Rizugata didn't speak, but her flushed cheeks and trembling delicate body showed that her emotions were fluctuating violently at the moment. Ding. Bond value with Fumino Furuashi increased by 10 points, currently at 80 points. Ding. Bond value with Rizugata increased by 10 points, currently at 80 points. The voice in his mind made Haru pause for a moment. Why did the bond values with Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata suddenly increase when I was talking in the classroom? Haru's expression became strange. He immediately realized that there were probably people eavesdropping outside the classroom. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Fortunately, he hadn't agreed to Mufagarasu earlier. Otherwise, his bond values with the two would probably have plummeted, possibly even dropping to 0. However, while the bond values with the two outside increased, Haru felt that the bond value with his great beauty in the classroom was probably plummeting. Although he couldn't see the changes in bond value with Mufagarasu yet, Haru could sense it from the bone-chilling coldness on Mufagarasu's incredibly beautiful face. Naive. Mufagarasu now looked at Haru almost no differently than she looked at Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata. Her exquisite face seemed covered with eternal, unmelting frost. Her entire being was like a cold queen from the Ice and Snow Kingdom. Looking down at Haru from on high. Under her alluring black-stockinged long legs, her red high heels stepped forcefully on the floor. Stern words emerged from her cherry lips. Wasting one's talent for childish dreams is the most pitiful thing. Moreover, their talent in different fields can only be described as terribly inferior. No matter how much they persist, it's just a waste of time. Garasu-sensei. Seeing Mufagarasu, who was already somewhat angry, Haru remained calm and met her gaze directly. Haru had always held great respect in his heart for Mufagarasu, this serious and responsible teacher. Moreover, Mufagarasu was one of Haru's favorite anime female characters from his previous life. He didn't want his relationship with Mufagarasu to become terrible. Even without considering these factors, just the fact that Mufagarasu could provide suggestions to Haru made it necessary for him to change Mufagarasu's opinion. So he immediately had a plan in mind. I know that you want to convince Furuashi-san and Ogata-san now because their grades haven't shown any progress. Haru took a deep breath, but what if they could make effective progress in different subjects? Haru understood that Mufagarasu's attitude toward Fumino Furuashi and Rizugata was the normal teacher attitude. If Furuashi and Ogata had even half a bit of talent in different fields, Mufagarasu might not give up so quickly. The problem was that the two had terrifyingly low talent in the fields they wanted to pursue. Any random poor student wouldn't perform as badly as they did. So, to change Mufagira's opinion, he had to approach it from this angle. If Mufagirasu laughed coldly, such hypotheticals are meaningless. The reality is that they've been tutored for a week and their scores can't even break out of single digits. If you're unwilling to persuade them, then there's no need to say anything more. Mufagirasu looked at Haru with complete disappointment, raising her eyelids. You may go. The tutoring group will continue, but only until the midterm exams, then this tutoring group will be cancelled. Outside, hearing Mufagirasu's words, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata felt somewhat dejected. Ever since the conversation before tutoring class, they knew this tutoring group probably wouldn't last much longer. They had already anticipated this result. However, they didn't regret it. Even if Mufagirasu no longer tutored them, they couldn't possibly give up their dreams. Moreover, now they had Haru's support. Their hearts remained firm. But just then, a loud voice suddenly rang out from inside, startling both of them. Girasu-sensei, please give me one chance. In the classroom, Haru suddenly moved closer to Mufagirasu and raised his voice. Of course he wouldn't give up just like that. If he gave up now, Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata would be fine, but his bond with Mufagirasu would be completely hopeless. His sudden action startled Mufagirasu. A blush appeared on her exquisite face as she said with embarrassment and annoyance, Haru, what are you doing? Mufagirasu's personality was somewhat shy, especially since she had never had intimate contact with boys since childhood. Being suddenly approached by Haru, with a boy's breath washing over her, made Mufagirasu's heart panic. Sorry. Haru showed an apologetic smile and stepped back. However, after this action, Mufagirasu's attitude wasn't as cold anymore. This made Haru breathe a sigh of relief. This way, what he said next would be easier. Girasu-sensei, what I want to say is, please give me, Furuashi-san, and Ogata-san one chance. Seeing Haru move away a bit, Mufagirasu couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Hearing these words, she raised her eyebrows. What kind of chance? Girasu-sensei's tutoring is very effective. I don't want this tutoring group to be disbanded like this. Haru stared straight at Mufagirasu. The chance I want is for Girasu-sensei to change her mind. Mufagirasu was stunned for a moment, then frowned. Haru, I won't change my mind. What if Furuashi-san and Ogata-san can produce results that satisfy Girasu-sensei in the midterm test? Haru said. Mufagirasu continued frowning. She didn't believe that with Fumino Furuashi's science talent and Rizuogata's liberal arts talent, they could produce any results that would satisfy her in the midterm exam. Haru's words were completely a waste of time. Outside the door, although Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata were deeply moved by Haru's trust in them, they also felt a bit guilty, thinking Haru trusted them too much. The midterm exam was very close, less than a month away. How could they possibly get good grades in such a short time? But hearing Haru's next words from inside, both Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata's faces stiffened instantly. Girasu-sensei, I can guarantee that during the midterm exam, I'll have Furuashi-san pass all science subjects and Ogata-san pass all liberal arts subjects. Haru spoke with firm determination, his gaze earnestly fixed on Mufagirasu. If they can achieve such results, I hope Girasu-sensei will take back what she just said. This is the chance I want. At this moment, Mufagirasu wondered if she had heard wrong, as if she had heard some fantastical tale. Outside the door, Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata were completely stunned. They really wanted to say, Big brother. Before you said such impressive words, did you consider whether our abilities might not be enough? Chapter 23, Mufagirasu's soaring bond value. Haru's words undoubtedly moved both Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata greatly. But the goal he proposed was too arduous. Although Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata also wanted to achieve such a goal, both knew in their hearts that with their abilities, it was simply impossible. For a moment, both became heavy-hearted. Haru was even willing to confront Girasu-sensei for their sake. If they couldn't achieve such a goal, wouldn't they be letting down Haru's trust in them? Unlike the two worried people outside, Mufagirasu's expression remained frozen for a long time. Then she looked at Haru with a strange expression. Haru, the goal you proposed could indeed satisfy me. But please consider reality, no matter how lofty the goal. In 1 week, they couldn't even break out of single digits in basic subjects like Japanese and math. Liberal arts, science, so many subjects. How could Fumino Furuashi and Rizuogata possibly pass them all? Passing all subjects was a very low requirement for other students. But for Fumino Furuashi's science and Rizuogata's liberal arts, it was almost impossible. So Mufagirasu just felt that Haru was being overly passionate, completely ignoring reality. Girasu-sensei, you'll persist until the midterm exam anyway, even if you give up being our instructor, right? Haru looked straight at Mufagirasu. showing a confident smile. Then why not give us a glimmer of hope? If we can't achieve this goal, Girasu-sensei can give up instructing us then. At that time, no one would blame Girasu-sensei. This goal was certainly difficult for others. But Haru would soon obtain the best tutoring talent. He believed he had the confidence to achieve it. As long as he could reach that goal, he believed the bond values of both Fumino Furuashi and Rizu Ogata would increase significantly. Anyway, it won't affect Sensei in the slightest. Haru looked at Mifagirasu, a hint of hidden expectation flashing in his eyes.